Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Nosferatu, the Wrath of Malachi. When last we left off, we were caught off guard by the time limit not being nearly as pressing as it felt. We've done a very good job thus far of saving our family and guests, and tonight we bring everything to a close. We need to save a few more people, all in the main castle. And this time we also know how the castle functions. To an extent, at least. And we do have quite the arsenal to our name. We should make most of this. Fairly simple. In theory, at least. Denied. Oh, there you are. Well, that was most unbecoming of you.
Mr. James, get me out of here or I'll sew your pants off.
We're running short of time, James. I know the Lord of Darkness has captured your sister, and God knows what he intends to do with her. Rest assured it won't be pretty. I've seen him dwell in the upper regions of this castle. You must hurry to her rescue. This strange portal will lead you to his domains. However, you must bring me to safety first. Put a mask key to all the family trunks in my trunk. Take me there and I'll give it to you. Do you intend to come with me? If you want to make a fuss about it, then... Not under attack, you're fine.
We're under attack. A dead lawyer is a bad lawyer. A dead lawyer is a bad...
Am I repeating that? Alright, come now.
I don't intend to thank you. It was you people that got me into this mess.
Here's a little something for that
place.
wound.
However, no remaining trunks. That's fine. There are 2 faces left to save, and then we're fine. What I intended to do, however. If it deals with you, I have no complaints. Well, I do not appreciate the lingering chanting of bringing out the crucifix. The Jones does love to be things disagreeable. At times, at least. I never quite learned what you were, actually. Not officially, at least. Other than a durable nuisance. It really is. Just very poor self-preservation. Jump out at a man carrying a machine gun. Alright, let's see if we can Save Uncle Andrew next. Not found the key on this level. What room or rooms did I have a look in the process? Yes, I know the path to the third floor is nearby. Small a grace as it may be, it is still a grace nonetheless. Ah, this would be why. You best looks both of you opted to stay dead. Alright, up we go. So I'm even keeping my guns properly reloaded in case of emergencies, such as this one. Oh, see, there was another person to save. Are you just in here? You are indeed. In the circumstances of our situation, it's probably best for me to keep you by.
Oh my god! Save yourself first, son! I'll stick with you. Oh my god! Save yourself first, son!
You need to be a bit less jumpy.
Oh my god! Save yourself first!
Oh. Ah. Uncle Andrew just died.
Oh my god! Save yourself first, son!
Well, in that case... come with me. Oh. What's happened? What? More abruptly than I was anticipating. I presume, then... And what we have is... what we have in this matter... really should get you to safety. And then probably reveal the chalice.
Good work, son. Glad I could help you out back there.
Let's go refill our chalice. Dawn has arrived. And with it a final confrontation.
Your head is pounding with the screams of 1,000 tortured souls, sacrificed through the ages to Malachi's glory. Before dying, you realize that you are the final sacrifice required to complete the resurrection of Malachi. This is your final thought as you lose your identity to become one with this ultimate evil. The wrath of Malachi is cast upon the world, and you are the one that has unleashed it.
Let's try that again. Again, surely an option. So another auto puzzle going on here. I believe so.
Your head.
Let's give this another try.
Your head is...
Okay, so the answer seems to be yes, but also the light also is dangerous to me. The sister said there's nothing you can do to change that. Well, fair enough. Just in case they try to... Oh. Okay, so this is where we utilize all of our excess ammunition.
As the evil Malachi falls defeated, you are overcome with emotion. Your sister is dead, but the world is saved from an evil greater than you could ever have imagined. Although you may not appreciate it now, you have fought and won as a true hero.
The last illusion, gentlemen, concludes Nosferatu, the Wrath of Malachi. Honestly, very interesting game. Definitely brought a lot of the... You can definitely feel the time periods from partially with the influence of Half-Life still very prevalent in its DNA. And the earliest procedural generation really does help keep you on your toes throughout. Where its strong sound and music design really do help to keep you prepared and intimidated by the foes you encounter in each given room, especially because they can respawn anytime you return to a room. Combining that with, of course, the fact that some of the boss fights they maintain their tension for the most part. Honestly, of them, I felt the least intimidated by Lord Malachi. Perhaps in part because of the fact that I did keep the chalice in mind throughout the adventure. And made sure to refill it before going to the right boss. But the fact that most fights are intended more in a puzzle fight structure rather than some big damage sponge. Really does help to keep the atmosphere and tension going. About the fact that most of the ghoul weapons require you either knowing, either going through a challenge quite early, such as getting the flintlock, leaving the flintlock in a guaranteed room that contains bust or otherwise. But trying to challenge that from the just immediately other gates might result in a bit more error than trial, frankly. Otherwise you have to wait until you actually get your first family member saved, otherwise you're dancing with the cane sword primarily. If you manage to get the doctor first, the End of the Chalice, which can help you with particularly stronger fights, but in the East Wing, you end up fighting more just hordes of small enemies, where the Chalice really will not help. It is a fascinating game to return to, though. I did think trying to return to this and getting us to clear it would take a little bit longer than it did. But at the same time, I suppose just having someone in tow. So did I miss Mr. Patterson in general last time? Even after Uncle Andrew died? Oh no, I never found Belmore. That was it. And so because he was still alive, it wouldn't move to dawn. That was why. I've had to wait until he died of natural causes. Or managed to find him. Either way, the variability of playthroughs does give this some degree of replay value. Not a ton, as it is definitely, despite its procedural generation, not a roguelike. Things are definitely there are definite constants. And the variability isn't considerably high, though the order of your family members and the way you'll address them definitely adds a bit of a personal flair and variety to a game. Which is actually a really good way of offsetting its relatively short runtime. Because it is a fraction of the length of similar shooters. Though it is all a different breed on numerous fronts. Very glad I played this. But, ladies and gentlemen, our showcase is not done today. While the past few days we've been reading The Beetle, a mystery, there is something else that I feel is a little bit more thematically appropriate to the showcase we have here. And thus, after a brief intermission, we will return with a reading of Moby Dick. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. There we are. Oh, actually, right, there's one more thing I've got to do. I am quite scatterbrained on a Friday night, it seems. There we are. Chapter 1. Loomings. Call me Ishmael. Some years ago, never mind how long precisely, having little or no money in my purse and nothing particular to interest me on shore, I thought I would sail about a little and see the watery part of the world. It is a way I have of drifting off the spleen and regulating the circulation. Whenever I find myself growing grim about the mouth, whether it is the damp, drizzly November in my soul, whenever I find myself involuntarily pausing before coffin warehouses and bringing up the rear of every funeral I meet, and especially whenever my hypos gets such an upper hand of me that it requires a strong moral principle to prevent me from deliberately stepping into the street and methodically knocking people's hats off, then I account it high time to get to sea as soon as I can. This is my substitute for pistol and ball. With a philosophical flourish, Cato throws himself upon his sword. I quietly take to the ship. There is nothing surprising in this. If they but knew it, almost all men in their degree, some time or other, cherish very nearly the same feelings towards the ocean with me. There now is your insular city of the Manhattans, belted round by walls, Indian isles of coral reefs. Commerce surrounds it with her surf. Right and left, the streets take you waterward. Its extreme downtown is the Battery, where that noble mole is washed by waves and cooled by breezes, which a few hours previous were out of sight of land. Look at the crowds of water gazers there. Circumambulate the city of a dreamy Sabbath afternoon. Go from Collier's Hook to Coventry Slip, and from thence to Whitehall northward. What do you see? Posted like silent sentinels all around the town stand thousands upon thousands of mortal men, fixed in ocean reveries. Some leaning against the spires, some seated upon the pierheads, some looking over the bulwarks of ships from China, some high aloft in the rigging as if striving to get a still better seaward peep. But these were landsmen, of weak days pent up in lath and plaster, tied to counters, nailed to benches, clinched to desks. How then is this? Are the green fields gone? What do they here? But look, here come more crowds, pacing straight for the water, and seemingly bound for a dive. Strange, nothing will content them but the extremest limit of the land. Loitering under the shady lee of yonder warehouses will not suffice. No, they must get just as nigh the water as they possibly can without falling in. And where they stand, miles of them, leagues, inland as all, they come from lanes and alleys, streets and avenues, north, east, south, and west. Yet here they all unite. Tell me, does the magnetic virtue of the needles of the compasses of all those ships attract them thither? Once more, Say you are in the country, in some high land of lakes. Take almost any path you please, and 10 to 1 it carries you down in a day, and leaves you there by a pool in the stream. There is magic in it. Let the most absent-minded of men be plunged in his deepest reveries. Stand that man on his legs, set his feet a-going, and he will infallibly lead you to water, if water there be in all that region. Should you ever be athirst in the great American desert, try this experiment if your caravan happen to be supplied with a metaphysical professor. Yes, as everyone knows, meditation and water are wedded forever. But here is an artist. He desires to paint you the dreamiest, shadiest, quietest, most enchanting bit of romantic landscape in all the valley of the Seco. What is the chief element he employs? There stand his trees, each with a hollow trunk, as if a hermit and a crucifix were within. And here sleeps his meadow, and there sleep his cattle, and up from yonder cottage goes a sleepy smoke. Deep into distant woodlands winds a mazy way, reaching to overlapping spurs of mountains bathed in their hillside blue. To the picture lies thus tranced, and though this pine tree shakes down its sides like leaves upon this shepherd's head, yet all were vain unless a shepherd's eye were fixed upon the magic stream before him. Go visit the prairies in June, when for scores on scores of miles you wade knee-deep among tiger lilies. What is the one charm wanting? Water. There is not a drop of water there. Were Niagara but a cataract of sand, would you travel your 1,000 miles to see it? Why, to the poor poet of Tennessee, upon suddenly receiving 2 handfuls of silver, deliberate whether to buy him a coat, which he sadly needed, or invest his money in a pedestrian trip to Rockaway Beach? Why is almost every robust, healthy boy with a robust, healthy soul in him at some time or other crazy to go to sea? Why, upon your first voyage as a passenger, did you yourself feel a mystical vibration when first told that you and your ship were now out of sight of land? Why do the old Persians hold the sea holy? Why do the Greeks give it a separate deity, and own brother of Jove? Surely all this is not without meaning. And still deeper the meaning of that story of Narcissus, who, because he could not grasp the tormenting, mild image he saw in the fountain, plunged into it and was drowned. That same image we ourselves see in all rivers and oceans. It is the image of the ungraspable phantom of life. This is the key to it all. Now, when I say that I am in the habit of going to sea whenever I begin to grow hazy about the eyes and begin to be overconscious of my lungs, I do not mean to have it inferred that I ever go to sea as a passenger. But to go as a passenger you must needs have a purse, and a purse is but a rag to have something in it. Besides, passengers get seasick, and grow quarrelsome, don't sleep of nights, do not enjoy themselves much as a general thing. No, I never go as a passenger, nor, though I am something of the sort, do I ever go as a commodore, or a captain, or a cook. I abandon the glory and distinction of such offices to those who like them. For my part, I abominate all honourable, respectable toils, trials, and tribulations of every kind whatsoever. It is quite as much as I can do to take care of myself without taking care of ships, barks, brigs, schooners, and what not. And as for going as cook, though I confess there is considerable glory in that. A cook being a sort of officer on shipboard, yet somehow I never fancied broiling fowls. Though once broiled, judiciously buttered, and dogmatically salted and peppered, there is no one who will speak more respectfully, not to say reverentially, of a broiled fowl than I will. It is out of the idolatrous dotings of the old Egyptians upon broiling ibis and roasted river horse that you see the mummies of those creatures in their huge bakehouses, the pyramids. No, when I go to sea, I go as a simple sailor. Right before the mast, plumb down into the forecastle, aloft there to the royal masthead. True, they rather order me about some and make me jump from spar to spar like a grasshopper in a May meadow. And at first, the sort of thing is unpleasant enough. It touches one's sense of honor, particularly if you come of an old established family in the land, the Van Sailors, or Randalls, or Hardicanutes, and more than all, just previous to putting your hand into the teapot, you've been lording it as a country schoolmaster, making the tallest boys stand in awe of you. Transition is a keen one, I assure you, from a schoolmaster to a sailor, and requires a strong decoction of Seneca and the Stoics to enable you to grin and bear it. But even this wears off in time. What of it if some old hunks of sea captain orders me to get a broom and sweep down the decks? What does that indignity amount to weighed, I mean, in the scales of the New Testament? Do you think the Archangel Gabriel thinks anything the less of me because I promptly and respectfully obey that old hunks in that particular instance? Who ain't a slave? Tell me that. Well, then, however the old sea captains may order me about, however they may thump and punch me about, I have the satisfaction of knowing that it is all right, that everybody else is one way or another served in much the same way. Either in a physical or metaphysical point of view, that is, and so the universal thump is passed around, and all hands should rub each other's shoulder blades and be content. Again, I always go to sea as a sailor because they make a point of paying me for my trouble, whereas I never pay passengers a single penny that I ever heard of. On the contrary, passengers themselves must pay, and there is all the difference in the world between paying and being paid. The art of paying is perhaps the most uncomfortable infliction that the two orchid thieves entailed upon us, but being paid, what will compare with it? The obeying an activity with which a man receives money is really marvellous, considering that we so earnestly believe money to be the root of all earthly ills, and that on no account can a moneyed man enter heaven. Ah, how cheerfully we consign ourselves to petition! Finally, I always go to sea as a sailor because of the wholesome exercise in pure air of the forecastle deck. For as in this world, head winds are far more prevalent than winds from the stern. That is, if you never violate the Pythagorean maxim. So for the most part, the Commodore on the quarterdeck gets his atmosphere at second hand from the sailors on the forecastle. He thinks he breathes it first, but not so. In much the same way do the commonalty lead their leaders in many other things. At the same time, the leaders little suspect it. But wherefore it was that after having repeatedly smelt the sea as a merchant sailor, I should now take it into my head to go on a whaling voyage. This, the invisible police officer of the fates, who has the constant surveillance of me, secretly dogs me, and influences me in some unaccountable way. He can better answer than anyone else. And doubtless my going on this whaling voyage formed part of the grand programme of Providence that was drawn up a long time ago. It came in as a sort of brief interlude and solo between more extensive performances. I think this part of the bill must have run something like this. Grand contested election for the presidency of the United States. Whaling voyage by one Ishmael. Bloody battle in Afghanistan. Though I cannot tell why it was exactly these stage managers, the fates, put me down for this shabby part of a whaling voyage when others were set down for magnificent parts in high tragedies, and short and easy parts in genteel comedies, and jolly parts in farces, though I cannot tell why this was exactly. Yet, now that I recall all the circumstances, I think I can see a little into the springs and motives which, being cunningly presented to me under various guises, induced me to set about performing the part I did, besides cajoling me into the delusion there was a choice resulting from my own unbiased free will and discriminating judgment. Chief among these motives was the overwhelming idea of the great whale himself. Such a portentous and mysterious monster roused all my curiosity. In the wild and distant seas where he rolled his island bark, the undeliverable and nameless perils of the whale, these, with all the attending marvels of 1,000 Patagonian sights and sounds, helped to sway me to my wish. With other men, perhaps, such things would not have been inducements, but as for me, I am tormented with an everlasting itch for things remote. I love to sail to forbidden seas and land on barbarous coasts. Not ignoring what is good, I am quick to perceive a horror, would still be social with it. would they let me, since it is but well to be on friendly terms with all the inmates of the place one lodges in. By reason of these things, then, the whaling voyage was welcome. The great floodgates of the wonder world swung open, and into the wild conceits that swayed me to my purpose, tool into tool there floated into my inmost soul endless processions of the whale, and midmost of them all, one grand hooded phantom, like a snowhead in the air. Chapter 2. The Carpet Bag. I stuffed a shirt or two into my old carpet bag, tucked it under my arm, and started for Cape Horn, the Pacific. Quitting the good city of Old Manhattan, I duly arrived in New Bedford. It was a Saturday night in December, but was disappointed upon learning that the little packet for Nantucket had already sailed, and that no way of reaching that place would offer till the following Monday. As most young candidates for the pains and penalties of whaling stop at this same New Bedford, thence to embark on their voyage, it may as well be related that I, for one, had no idea of so doing. My mind was made up to sail in no other than a Nantucket craft, because there was a fine, boisterous something about everything connected with that famous old island, which amazingly pleased me. Besides, though New Bedford has of late been gradually monopolizing the business of whaling, and though in this matter poor old Nantucket is now much behind her, yet Nantucket was her great original, the Tyre of this Carthage, the place where the first dead American whale was stranded. Where else but from Nantucket did those aboriginal whalemen, the red men, first sally out in canoes to give chase to the Leviathan? And where from Nantucket, too, did that first adventurous little sloop put forth, partly laden with imported cobblestones, so goes the story, to throw at the whales in order to discover when they were nigh enough to risk a harpoon from the bowsprit, or from the bowsprit. Now having a night, a day, and still another night following before me in New Bedford ere I could embark from my destined port, it became a matter of concernment where I was to eat and sleep meanwhile. It was a very dubious-looking, nay, a very dark and dismal night, bitingly cold and cheerless. I knew no one in the place. With anxious grapnels I had sounded my pocket, and with only brought up a few pieces of silver. So wherever you go, Ishmael, said I to myself as I stood in the middle of a dreary street shouldering my bag, and comparing the gloom towards the north with the darkness towards the south. Wherever in your wisdom you may conclude to lodge for the night, my dear Ishmael, be sure to inquire the price. Don't be too particular. With halting steps I paced the streets and passed the sign of the Crossed Harpoons, but it looked too expensive and jolly there. Further on, from the bright red windows of the Swordfish Inn, there came such fervent rays that it seemed to have melted the packed snow and ice from before the house. But everywhere else a congealed frost lay 10 inches thick in a hard, asphaltic pavement. Rather weary for me when I struck my foot against the flinty projections, because from hard, remorseless service, the soles of my boots were in a most miserable plight. Too expensive and jolly again, thought I, pausing one moment to watch the broad glare in the street, and hear the sounds of the tinkling glasses within. Go on, Ishmael, said I at last. Don't you hear? Get away from before the door. Your patched boots are stopping the way. So on I went. I now by instinct followed the streets that took me waterward, for there doubtless were the cheapest, if not the cheeriest, inns. Such dreary streets, blocks of blackness, not houses on either hand, and here and there a candle, like a candle moving about in a tomb. At this hour of the night, of the last day of the week, that quarter of the town proved all but deserted. Presently I came to a smoky light proceeding from a low, wide building, the door of which stood invitingly open. It had a careless look, as if it were meant for the use of the public. So, entering. The first thing I did was to stumble over an ash box in the porch. Ha! Thought I. Ha! As the flying particles almost choked me. Are these ashes from that destroyed city Gomorrah? But the crossed harpoons and the swordfish. This, then, must needs be the sign of the trap. However, I picked myself up, and hearing a loud voice within, pushed on and opened a second interior door. It seemed the great black parliament sitting in Tophet. 100 black faces turned round in their rows to peer beyond. A black angel of doom was beating a book in a pulpit. It was a church, and the preacher's text was about the blackness of darkness, the weeping and wailing and teeth gnashing there. Ah, Ishmael, muttered I, backing out. Wretched entertainment at the sign of the trap. Moving on, I at last came to a dim sort of light, not far from the docks, and heard a forlorn creaking in the air, and, looking up, saw a swinging sign over the door with a white painting upon it, faintly representing a tall straight jet of misty spray, and these words underneath. The Spouter Inn. Peter Coffin. Coffin? Spouter? Rather ominous in that particular connection, thought I. But it is a common name in Nantucket, they say, and I suppose this Peter here is an emigrant from there. As the light looked so dim, the place, for the time, looked quiet enough, and the dilapidated little wooden house itself looked as if it might have been carted here from the ruins of some burnt district. And as the swinging sign had a poverty-stricken sort of creak to it, I thought that here was the very spot for cheap lodgings, and the best of pea coffee. It was a queer sort of place, a gable-ended old house, one side palsied, as it were, and leaning over sadly. It stood on a sharp, bleak corner where that tempestuous wind, Euroclydon, kept up a worse howling than ever it did about poor Paul's tossed craft. Euroclydon, nevertheless, is a mighty pleasant zephyr to any one indoors, with his feet on the hob quietly toasting for bed. In judging of that tempestuous wind called Euroclydon, says an old writer, of whose works I possess the only copy extant, it maketh a marvellous difference whether thou lookest at it from a glass window where the frost is all on the outside, or whether thou observest it from the sashless window where the frost is on both sides, and of which the white death is the only glazier. True enough, thought I, as this passage occurred to my mind. Old black letter, thou reasonest well. Yes, these eyes are windows, and this body of mine is the house. What a pity they didn't stop up the chinks and the crannies, though, and thrust in a little lint here and there. But it's too late to make any improvements now. The universe is finished, the copestone is on, and the chips will put a corncob in his mouth, and the chips were carted off 1,000,000 years ago. Poor Lazarus, there, chattering his teeth against the curbstone for his pillow and shaking off his tatters with his shiverings. He might plug up both ears with rangs and put a corncob into his mouth, and yet that would not keep out the tempestuous Euroclydon. Euroclydon, says old Dives in his red silken wrapper. Yet I read one afterwards. Pooh. What a fine frosty night, how Orion glitters. What northern lights. Let them talk of their oriental summer climes, of everlasting conservatories. Give me the privilege of making my own summer with my own gods. But what thinks Lazarus? Can he warm his blue hands by holding them up to the great northern lights? Would not Lazarus rather be in Sumatra than here? Would he not far rather lay him down lengthwise along the line of the equator? Yea, ye gods, go down to the fiery pit itself, in order to keep out of this frost. Now that Lazarus should lie stranded there on the curbstone before the door of Dives, this is more wonderful than that an iceberg should be moored to one of the Moluccas. Yet Dives himself, he too lives like a czar in an ice palace made of frozen sighs, and being a president of a temperance society, he only drinks the tepid tears of orphans. But no more of this blubbering gnaw. We are going a-whaling. And there is plenty of that yet to come. Let us scrape the ice from our frosted feet, and see what sort of a place this Spouter may be. Entering that gable-ended spouter inn, you find yourself in a wide, low, straggling entry with old-fashioned wainscots, reminding one of the bulwarks of some condemned old craft. On one side hung a very large oil painting, so thoroughly besmoked and every way defaced, that in the unequal crosslights by which you viewed it, was only by diligent study and a series of systematic visits to it, and careful inquiry of the neighbours, that you could in any way arrive at an understanding of its purpose. Such unaccountable masses of shades and shadows that at first you almost thought some ambitious young artist in the time of New England hags had endeavoured to delineate chaos bewitched. But by dint of much and earnest contemplation and oft-repeated ponderings, and especially by throwing open the little window towards the back of the entry, you at last come to the conclusion that such an idea, however wild, might not be altogether unwarranted. But what most puzzled and confounded you was a long, limber, portentous black mass of something hovering in the centre of the picture of the three blue, dim, perpendicular lines floating in a nameless east. A boggy, soggy, squitchy picture truly enough to drive a nervous man distracted. Yet was there a sort of indefinite, half-attained, unimaginable sublimity about it that fairly froze you to it, till you involuntarily took an oath with yourself to find out what that marvellous painting meant. Ever and anon, a bright but alas deceptive idea would dart you through. It's the Black Sea in a midnight gale. It's the unnatural combat of the four primal elements. It's a blasted heath. It's a Hyperborean winter scene. It's the breaking up of the icebound stream of time. But at last all these fancies yielded to that one portentous something the pictures midst. That was Nosferatu, and all the rest were plain. But stop, does it not bear a faint resemblance to a gigantic fish, even the great Leviathan himself? In fact, the artist's design seemed this, a final theory of my own, partly based upon the aggregated opinions of many aged persons with whom I conversed upon the subject. The picture represents a Cape Horner in a great hurricane, the half-foundered ship weltering there with its three dismantled masts alone visible, and an exasperated whale purposing to spring clean over the craft is in the enormous act of impaling himself upon the three mastheads. The opposite wall of this entry was hung all over with a heathenish array of monstrous clubs and spears. Some were thickly set, with glittering teeth resembling ivory saws. Others were tufted with knots of human hair, and one was sickle-shaped, with the vast handles sweeping around like the segment made in the new-mown grass by a long-armed mower. You shuddered as you gazed, and wondered what monstrous cannibal and savage could ever have gone a death-harvesting with such a hacking, horrifying implement. Mixed with these were rusty old whaling lances and harpoons, all broken and deformed. Some were storied weapons. With this once long lance, now wildly elbowed 50 years ago, did Nathan Swain kill 15 whales between the sunrise and the sunset. And that harpoon, so like a corkscrew now, was flung in Javan seas, and run away with by a whale, years afterwards slain off the Cape of Blanca. The original iron entered nigh the tail, and like a restless needle sojourning in the body of a man, travelled full 40 feet, and at last was found embedded in the hump. Crossing this dusky entry and on through yon low-arched way, cut through what in old times must have been a great central chimney with fireplaces all round, you went to the public room, a still duskier place as this, with such low, ponderous beams above, and such old, wrinkled planks beneath, that you would almost fancy you trod some old spellcraft's cockpits, especially of such a howling night, when this corner-anchored old ark rocked so furiously. On one side stood a low, shelf-like table covered with cracked glass cases, filled with dusty rarities gathered from this wide world's remotest nooks. Projecting from the further angle of the room sat the dark-looking den, the bar, a rude attempt at a right whale's head. Be that how it may, there stands the vast arched bone of a whale's jaw, so wide a coach might almost drive beneath it. Within are shabby shelves ranged round with old decanters, bottles, flasks, and in those jaws of swift destruction, like another cursed Jonah, by which name indeed they called him, bustles a little withered old man who, for their money, dearly sends the sailors' deliriums into death. Abominable are the tumblers into which he pours his poison, though true cylinders without. Within, the villainous green goggling glasses deceitfully taper downwards to a cheating bottom. Parallel meridians rudely pecked into the glass, surrounding these footpads goblets. Fail to this mark, and your change is but a penny. To this a penny more, and so on the full glass. The Cape Horn measure, which you may gulp down for a shilling. Upon entering the place I found a number of young seamen gathered about a table, examining by a dim light divers specimens of scrimshander. I saw the landlord, and telling him my desire to be accommodated with a room, received for answer that his house was full, not a bed unoccupied. But avast, he added, tapping his forehead, you ain't no objections to sharing a harpooner's blanket, have you? I suppose you are going a whaling, and you'd better get used to that sort of thing. I would never like to sleep two in a bed, but if I should ever do so would depend on who the harpooner might be, and that if he, the landlord, really had no other place for me and the harpooner was not decidedly objectionable, why, rather than wander further about a strange town on so bitter a night, I'll put up with half of any decent man's blanket. I thought so. All right, take a seat. Supper? You want supper? Supper will be ready directly. I sat down on an old wooden settle, carved all over like a bench on the battery. At one end, the ruminating tar was still further adorning it with his jackknife, stooping over and diligently working away at the space between his legs. He was trying his hand at a ship under full sail, but he didn't make much headway, I thought. At last some 4 or 5 of us were summoned to our meal in an adjoining room. It was cold as Iceland, no fire at all. The landlord said he couldn't afford it. Nothing but 2 dismal tallow candles, each in a winding sheet. We were fain to button up our monkey jackets and hold to our lips cups of scalding tea with our half-frozen fingers. But the fare was of the most substantial kind. Not only meat and potatoes, but dumplings. Good heavens, dumplings for supper! One young fellow in a green box coat addressed himself to these dumplings in a most direful manner. My boy, said the landlord, you'll have the nightmare to a dead certainty. Landlord, I whispered. That ain't the harpooner, is it? Oh no, said he, looking sort of diabolically funny. Harpooner was a dark-complexioned chap. He never eats dumplings, he don't. He eats nothing but steaks, and he likes 'em rare. The devil he does, says I. Where is that harpooner? Is he here? He'll be here afore long, was the answer. I could not help it. I began to feel the suspicion of this dark-complexioned harpooner. At any rate, I made up my mind that if it so turned out that we should sleep together, he must undress and get into bed before I did. Supper over, the company went back to the bar-room when, knowing not what to do with myself, I resolved to spend the rest of the evening as a looker-on. Presently a rioting noise was heard without. Starting up, the landlord cried, "That's the Grampus's crew. I see it reported in the offing this morning, a 3 years' voyage and a full ship. Hurrah, boys, now we'll have the latest news from the Fijis." A tramping of sea boots was heard in the entry. The door was flung open, and in rolled a wild set of mariners enough, enveloped in their shaggy watch-coats, and with their heads muffled in woolen comforters, all bedarned and ragged, their beards stiff with icicles. They seemed an eruption of bears from Labrador. They had just landed from their boat, and this was the first house they entered. No wonder, then, that they made a straight wake for the whale's mouth, the bar, when the wrinkled old Jonah, there officiating, soon poured them out brimmers all round. One complained of a bad cold in his head, upon which Jonah mixed him a pitch-like potion of gin and molasses, which he swore was a sovereign cure for all colds and catarrhs whatsoever, never mind of how long-standing, or whether caught off the coast of Labrador or on the weather side of an ice island. The liquor soon mounted into their heads, as it generally does, even with the errantist topers newly landed from the sea. They began capering about most obstreperously. I observed, however, that one of them held somewhat aloof, and though he seemed desirous not to spoil the hilarity of his shipmates by his own sober face, yet upon the whole he refrained from making as much noise as the rest. And this man interested me at once, and since the sea gods had ordained that he should soon become my shipmate, though but a sleeping partner one, so far as his narrative is concerned, I will here venture upon a little description of him. He stood full 6 feet in height, with noble shoulders and a chest like a cofferdam. I have seldom seen such brawn in a man. His face was deeply brown and burnt, making his white teeth dazzling by the contrast, while in the deep shallows of his eyes floated some reminiscences that did not seem to give him much joy. His voice at once announced that he was a southerner, and from his fine stature, I thought he must have been one of those tall mountaineers from the Alleghanian Ridge in Virginia. When the revelry of his companions had mounted to its height, the man slipped away unobserved, and I saw no more of him until he became my comrade on the sea. In a few minutes, however, he was missed by his shipmates, and being, it seems, for some reason a huge favourite with them, they raised the cry of "Bulkington! Bulkington! Where's Bulkington?" and darted out of the house in pursuit of him. It was now about 9 o'clock, and the room seeming almost supernaturally quiet after these orgies, I began to congratulate myself upon a little plan that had occurred to me just previous to the entrance of the seaman. No man prefers to sleep two in a bed. In fact, you would a good deal rather not sleep with your own brother. I don't know how it is, but people like to be private when they are sleeping. When it comes to sleeping with an unknown stranger in a strange inn in a strange town, and that stranger a harpooner, then your objections indefinitely multiply. Nor was there any earthly reason why I, as a sailor, should sleep two in a bed more than anyone else, for sailors no more sleep two in a bed at sea than bachelor kings do ashore. To be sure, they all sleep together in one apartment, but you have your own hammock and cover yourself with your own blanket and sleep in your own skin. The more I pondered over this harpooner, the more abominated the thought of sleeping with him. It was fair to presume that being a harpooner, his linen or woolen, as the case might be, would not be of the tidiest, certainly none of the finest. I began to twitch all over. Besides, it was getting late, and my decent harpooner ought to be home and going bedwards. Suppose now he should tumble in upon me at midnight. How could I tell from what a vile hole he had been coming? "Landlord, I've changed my mind about that harpooner. I shan't sleep with him. I'll try the bench here." "Just as you please. I'm sorry I can't spare you a tablecloth for a mattress, but it's a plaguey rough board here, feeling of the knots and notches. But wait a bit, Scrimshander. I've got a carpenter's plane there in the bar. Wait, I say, and I'll make you snug enough." So saying, he procured the plane, and with his old silk handkerchief, first dusting the bench, vigorously set to planing away at my bed, the while grinning like an ape. The shavings flew right and left, till at last the plane iron came bump against an indestructible knot. Landlord was near spraining his wrist, and I told him for heaven's sake to quit. The bed was soft enough to suit me, and I did not know how all the planning in the world could make it eat down of a plain plank. So gathering up the shavings with another grin, and throwing them into the great stove in the middle of the room, he went about his business and left me in a brown study. I now took the measure of the bench and found that it was a foot too short. That could be mended with a chair. It was a foot too narrow. The other bench in the room was about 4 inches higher than the planed one, so there was no yoking them. I then placed the first bench lengthwise along the only clear space against the wall, leaving a little interval between for my back to settle down in. But I soon found that there came a draught of cold air over me from under the sill of the window, and this plan would never do at all, especially as another current from the rickety door met the one from the window, and both together formed a series of small whirlwinds in the immediate vicinity of the spot where I had thought to spend the night. The devil fetch that harpooner, thought I, but stop. Couldn't I steal a march on him, bolt his door inside, and jump into his bed, not be wakened by the most violent knockings? It seemed no bad idea, but upon second thoughts I dismissed it, for who could tell but what the next morning, so soon as I popped out of the room, the harpooner might be standing in the entry, all ready to knock me down? Still, looking round me again and seeing no possible chance of spending a sufferable night unless in some other person's bed, I began to think that after all I might be cherishing unwarrantable prejudices against this unknown harpooner. Thinks I, I'll wait a while. He must be dropping in before long. I'll have a good look at him then, and perhaps we may become jolly good bedfellows after all. There's no telling. But though the other boarders kept coming in by ones, twos, and threes and going to bed, yet no sign of my harpooner. Landlord, said I, what sort of a chap is he? Does he always keep such late hours? It was now hard upon 12 o'clock. Landlord chuckled again with his lean chuckle and seemed to be mightily tickled at something beyond my comprehension. No, he answered. Generally he's an early bird. Early to bed and early to rise. Yes, he's the bird what catches the worm. But tonight he went out a-peddling, you see, and I don't see what on earth keeps him so late. Unless, maybe, he can't sell his head. Can't sell his head? What sort of bamboozlingly story is this you are telling me? Getting to a towering rage. You didn't say, Landlord, this harpooner was actually engaged this blessed Saturday night, or rather Sunday morning, in peddling his head around this town? That's precisely it, said the landlord, and told him he couldn't sell it here. The market's overstocked. What? Shouted I. With heads, to be sure. Ain't there too many heads in the world? I tell you what it is, landlord, said I quite calmly. You'd better stop spinning that yarn to me. I'm not green. Maybe not, taking out a stick and whittling a toothpick. But I rather not guess you'll be done brown if that harpooner hears you a slandering his head. I'll break it for him, said I, now flying into a passion against this unaccountable farrago of the landlord's. It's broke already, says he. Broke, said I. Broke, do you mean? Certainly, that's the very reason he can't sell it, I guess. Landlord, said I, going up to him as cool as Mount Hecla in a snowstorm. Landlord, stop whittling. You and I must understand one another, and that too without delay. I come to your house and want a bed. So you can only give me half one. The other half belongs to a certain harpooner. And about this harpooner, whom I have not yet seen, you insist on telling me the most mystifying and exasperating stories, tending to beget in me an uncomfortable feeling towards the man whom you design for my bedfellow. A sort of connection, landlord, which is an intimate and confidential one in the highest degree. I now demand of you to speak out and tell me who and what this harpooner is, and whether I shall in all respects be safe to spend the night with him. And in the first place, you will be so good as to unsay that story about selling his head, which, if true, I take to be good evidence this harpooner is stark mad, and I've no idea of sleeping with a madman. And you, sir, landlord, you, sir, by trying to induce me to do so knowingly, would thereby render yourself liable to a criminal prosecution. Well, said the landlord, fetching a long breath, that's a pretty long sermon for a chap that rips a little now and then, but be easy, be easy. This here harpooner I've been telling you of has just arrived from the South Seas, where he bought up a lot of bombed New Zealand heads. Great curios, you know. And he sold all on number one, and that one he's trying to sell tonight, because tomorrow's Sunday, it would not do to be selling human heads about the streets when folks is going to churches. He wanted to last Sunday, but I saw him just as he was going out of the door with 4 heads strung on a string, for all the earth like a string of onions. This account cleared up the otherwise unaccountable mystery and showed that the landlord, after all, had no idea of fooling me. At the same time, what could I think of a harpooner who stays out on a Saturday night, clinging to the Holy Sabbath, engaged in such a cannibal business as selling the heads of dead idolaters? Depend upon it, landlord, that harpooner is a dangerous man. His regular, he said, was the rejoinder. But come, it's getting dreadful late. We'd better be turning loose. It's a nice bed. Sal and me slept in that here bed the night we were spliced. There's plenty of room for two to kick about in that bed. It's no mighty big bed, that. Why, before we give it up, Sal used to put our Sam and little Johnny in the foot of it. We got to dreaming and sprawled about one night, and somehow Sam got pitched on the floor and came near breaking his arm. After that, Sal said it wouldn't do. Come along here. I'll give you a glim in a jiffy. And so saying, he lighted a candle and held it towards me, offering to lead the way, but I stood irresolute, looking at a clock in the corner. He exclaimed, "If I'm at Sunday, you won't see that harpooner tonight. He's come to anchor somewhere. Come along, then. Do come. Won't you come?" I considered the matter a moment, and then upstairs we went. I was ushered into a small room, cold as a clam, and furnished, sure enough, with a prodigious bed, almost big enough indeed for any 4 harpooneers to sleep abreast. There, said the landlord, placing the candle on a crazy old sea chest that did double duty as a washstand and centre table. There, make yourself comfortable now, and good night to you. I turned around from eyeing the bed, but he had disappeared. Holding back the counterpane, I stooped over the bed. Though none of the most elegant, it yet stood the scrutiny tolerably well. I then glanced around the room, and besides the bedstead and centre table, could see no other furniture belonging to the place but a rude shelf, 4 walls, and a papered fireboard representing a man striking away. Of things not properly belonging to the room, there was a hammock lashed up and thrown upon the floor in one corner, also a large seaman's bag containing the harpooner's wardrobe, no doubt into a land trunk. Likewise, there was a parcel of outlandish bonefish hooks on the shelf over the fireplace, and a tall harpoon standing at the head of the bed. But what is this on the chest? I took it up and held it close to the light, and felt it and smelt it, and tried every way possible to arrive at some satisfactory conclusion concerning it. I compare it to nothing but a large doormat, ornamented at the edges with little tinkling tongues, something like a stained porcupine quills rather than an Indian moccasin. There was a hole or slit in the middle of this mat, as you can see the same in South American ponchos. Could it be possible that any sober harpooner would get into a doormat and parade the streets of any Christian town in that sort of guise? I put it on to try it, and it weighed me down like a hamper, uncommonly shaggy and thick. And I thought, little damn, as this mysterious harpooner had been wearing it of a rainy day, I went up in it to a bit of glass stuck against the wall, and I never saw such a sight in my life. I tore myself out of it in such a hurry that I gave myself a kink in the neck. I sat down on the side of the bed and commenced thinking about this head-peddling harpooner and his doormat. After thinking some time on the bedside, I got up and took off my monkey jacket, and then stood in the middle of the room thinking. I then took off my coat and thought a little more in my shirt-sleeves, beginning to feel very cold now, half undressed as I was, remembering that the landlord said about the harpooner's not coming home at all that night, it being so very late. I made no more ado, but jumped out of my pantaloons and boots, and then blowing out the light, tumbled into bed, and commenced myself to the care of heaven. Whether that mattress was stuffed with corn cobs or broken crockery, there is no telling, but I rolled about a good deal, and could not sleep for a long time. At last I slid off into a light doze, and had pretty nearly made a good offing towards the land of Nod, when I heard a heavy footfall in the passage, and saw a glimmer of light come into the room from under the door. Lord save me, thinks I, that must be the harpooner, the infernal head peddler, but I lay perfectly still, and resolved not to say a word till spoken to. Holding a light in one hand, and that identical New Zealand head in the other, the stranger entered the room, and without looking towards the bed, placed his candle a good way off from me on the floor in one corner, and then began working away at the knotted cords of the large bag I before spoke of as being in the room. I was all eagerness to see his face, but he kept it averted for some time while employed in unlacing the bag's mouth. This accomplished, however, he turned round when, good heavens, what a sight! What a face! It was of a dark purplish yellow colour, here and there stuck over with large blackish looking squares. Yes, just as I thought, he's a terrible bedfellow. He's been in a fight, got dreadfully cut, and here he is just from the surgeon. But at that moment he chanced to turn his face toward the light, that I plainly saw they could not be sticking plasters at all, with black squares on his cheeks. They were stains of some sort or another. At first I didn't know what to make of this, but soon an inkling of the truth occurred to me. I remembered a story of a white man, a whaleman too, who, falling among the cannibals, had been tattooed by them. I concluded that this harpooner, in the course of his distant voyages, must have met with a similar adventure. And what is it, thought I, after all? It's only his outside. A man can be honest in any sort of skin. But then, what to make of his unearthly complexion? What part of it, I mean, lying round about, completely independent of the squares of tattooing? To be sure, it might be nothing but a good coat. Tropical tanning, but I never heard of a hot sun's tanning a white man into a purplish yellow one. However, I had never been in the South Seas, and perhaps the sun there produced these extraordinary effects upon the skin. Now, while all these ideas were passing through me like lightning, this harpooner never noticed me at all. After some difficulty, having opened his bag, he commenced fumbling in it, and presently pulled out a sort of tomahawk, and a sealskin wallet with the hair on. Placing these on the old chest in the middle of the room, he then took the New Zealand head, ghastly thing enough, and crammed it down into the bag. He now took off his hat, a new beaver hat. When I came nigh, seeing out with fresh surprise, there was no hair on his head, not to speak of at least, nothing but a small scalp knot twisted up on his forehead. His bald, purplish head now looked for all the world like a mildewed skull. Had not the stranger stood between me and the door, I would have bolted out of it quicker than ever I bolted at dinner. Even as it was, I thought something of slipping out of the window, but it was a second floor back. I am no coward, but what to make of this head-peddling purple rascal altogether past my comprehension. Ignorance is the parent of fear, and being completely nonplussed and confounded about the stranger, I confess, I was now as much afraid of him as if it was the devil himself who had thus broken into my room at the dead of night. In fact, I was so afraid of him that I was not game enough just then to address him and demand a satisfactory answer concerning what seemed inexplicable in him. Meanwhile, he continued the business of undressing, and at last showed his chest and arms. As I live, these covered parts of him were checkered with the same squares as his face. His back, too, was all over the same dark squares. He seemed to have been in a 30 Years' War, and just escaped from it with a sticking plaster shirt. Still more, his very legs were marked, as if a parcel of dark green frogs were running up the trunks of young palms. It was now quite plain that he must be some abominable savage or other shipped aboard of a whaleman in the South Seas, and so landed in this Christian country. I quaked to think of it. Peddler of heads, too, perhaps the heads of his own brothers. He might take a fancy to mine. Heavens, look at that tomahawk. But there was no time for shuddering, for now the savage went about something that completely fascinated my attention, and convinced me that he must indeed be a heathen. Going to his heavy Gregor, or rapport, or dreadnought, which he had previously hung on a chair, he fumbled in the pockets and produced at length a curious little deformed image with a hunch in its back, and exactly the colour of a 3 days old Congo baby. Remembering the embalmed head at first, I almost thought that this black mannequin was a real baby preserved in some similar manner, but seeing that it was not at all limber, and that it glistened a good deal like polished ebony, I concluded that it must be nothing but a wooden idol, which indeed it proved to be. But now the savage goes up to the empty fireplace, and removing the papered fireboard, sets up this little hunchbacked image, like a tenpin, between the underruns. The chimney jambs and all the bricks inside were very sooty, so that I thought this fireplace made a very appropriate little shrine or chapel for his Congo idol. I now screwed my eyes hard towards the half-hidden image, feeling but ill at ease meantime to see what was next to follow. First he takes about a double handful of shavings out of his Gregor pocket and places them carefully before the idol. Then laying a bit of ship biscuit on top and applying the flame from the lamp, he kindled the shavings into a sacrificial blaze. Presently, after many hasty snatches into the fire and still hastier withdrawals of his finger, whereby he seemed to be scorching them badly, he at last succeeded in drawing out the biscuit. Then, blowing off the heat and ashes a little, he made a polite offer of it to the little idol. The little devil did not seem to fancy such dry sort of fare at all. He never moved his lips. All these strange antics were accompanied by little stranger guttural noises from the devotee, who seemed to be praying in a sing-song or singing some pagan psalmody or other, during which his face twitched about in the most unnatural manner. At last, extinguishing the fire, he took the idol up very unceremoniously and banged it again in his Gregor pocket, as careless as if he were a sportsman bagging a dead woodcock. All these queer proceedings increased my uncomfortableness, and seeing him now exhibiting strong symptoms of concluding his business operations and jumping to bed with me, I thought it was high time, now or never before the light was put out, to break the spell in which I had so long been bound. But the interval I spent in deliberating what to say was a fatal one. Taking up his tomahawk from the table, he examined the head of it for an instant, and then, holding it into the light with his mouth at the handle, he puffed out great clouds of tobacco smoke. The next moment the light was extinguished, and this wild cannibal, tomahawk between his teeth, sprang into bed with me. I sang out. I could not help it now, and giving a sudden grunt of astonishment, he began feeling me. Something about something, I knew not what. I rolled away from him against the wall, and then conjured him, whoever or whatever he might be, to keep quiet, let me get up, and light the lamp again. But his subtle responses satisfied me at once that he but ill comprehended my meaning. "Who a devil you?" he said at last. "You no speak it, damn me, kill ye." And so, saying, the lighted tomahawk began flourishing about me in the dark. "Landlord, for God's sake! Peter Coffin!" shouted I. "Landlord, watch! Coffin! Angel, save me!" "Speak ye. Telling me who he be, or damn me, I kill ye." Again growled the cannibal, while his horrid flourishings of the tomahawk scattered the taut tobacco ashes about me until I thought my linen would get on fire. But thank heaven, at that moment the landlord came into the room, light in hand, and leaping from the bed, I ran up to him. "Don't be afraid now," said he, grinning again. "Queequeg here wouldn't harm a hair of your head." "Stop your grinning," shouted I. "Won't you tell me that infernal harpooner was a cannibal?" "I thought you'd know it. Didn't I tell you he was peddling heads around town?" returned Flukes again, and go to sleep. "Queequeg, look here. You savvy me, I savvy. You and this man sleepy you. You savvy?" "We savvy plenty," grunted Queequeg, puffing away at his pipe and sitting up in bed. "You get in," he added, motioning to me with his tomahawk and throwing the clothes to one side. He really did this in not only a civil but really kind and charitable way. I stood looking at him a moment. For all his tattooings, he was on the whole a clean, comely-looking cannibal. What's all this fuss I have been making about, thought I to myself. The man's a human being just as I am. He has just as much reason to fear me as I have to be afraid of him. Better sleep with a sober cannibal than a drunken Christian. "Landlord," said I, "tell him to set his tomahawk there, or pipe, or whatever you call it. Tell him to stop smoking, in short, and I will turn in with him. But I don't fancy having a man smoking in bed with me. It's dangerous. Besides, I ain't insured." This being told to Queequeg, he at once complied, and again politely motioned me to get into bed, rolling over to one side as much as to say, "I won't touch a leg of you." "Good night, landlord," said I. "You may go." I turned in and never slept better in my life. Upon waking next morning about daylight, I found Queequeg's arm thrown over me in the most loving and affectionate manner. You had almost thought I had been his wife. The counterpane was a patchwork full of odd little party-coloured squares and triangles, and this arm of his tattooed all over with an interminable Cretan labyrinth of a figure, no two parts of which were of one precise shade, owing, I suppose, to his keeping his arm at sea unmethodically in sun and shade. His shirt-sleeves irregularly rolled up at various times. The same arm of his, I say, looked for all the world like a strip of that same patchwork quilt. Indeed, partly lying on it as the arm did when I first awoke, I could hardly tell it was from the quilt. They so blended their hues together, and it was only by the sense of weight and pressure that I could tell that Queequeg was hugging me. My sensations were strange. I tried to explain them. When I was a child, I well remember a somewhat similar circumstance that befell me. Whether it was reality or dream, I never could entirely settle. The circumstance was this. I'd been cutting up some caper or other. I think it was trying to crawl up the chimney, as I had seen little Sweet do a few days previous, and my stepmother, who, somehow or other, was all the time whipping me or sending me to bed supperless. My mother dragged me by the legs out of the chimney and packed me off to bed. Though it was only 2 o'clock in the afternoon of the 21st June, the longest day in the year in our hemisphere. I felt dreadfully. There was no help for it, so upstairs I went to my little room, on the 3rd floor, and dressed myself as slowly as possible so as to kill time, and with a bitter sigh, got between the sheets. I lay there, dismally calculating that 16 entire hours must elapse before I could hope for resurrection. 16 hours in bed! The small of my back ached to think of it, and it was so light too, with the sun shining in at the window and a great rattling of coaches in the street, and the sound of gay voices all over the house. I felt worse and worse. At last I got up, dressed, and softly going down in my stockinged feet sought out my stepmother and suddenly threw myself at her feet, beseeching her as a particular favour to give me a good slippering for my misbehaviour, anything indeed but condemning me to lie abed such an unendurable length of time. But she was the best and most conscientious of stepmothers, and back I had to go to my room. For several hours I lay there broad awake, feeling a great deal worse than I have ever been than I have ever done since, even from the greatest subsequent misfortunes. At last I must have fallen into a troubled nightmare of a doze, and slowly waking from it, half steeped in dreams, opened my eyes, and the before sunlit room was now wrapped in outer darkness. Instantly I felt a shock running through all my frame. Nothing was to be seen and nothing was to be heard, but a supernatural hand seemed placed in mine. My arm hung over the counterpane, and the nameless, unimaginable, silent form or phantom, to which the hand belonged, seemed closely seated by my bedside. For what seemed ages piled on ages, I lay there, frozen with the most awful fears, not daring to drag away my hand, yet ever thinking that if I could but stir it one single inch, the horrid spell would be broken. I knew not how this consciousness at last glided away from me, but waking in the morning I shudderingly remembered it all, and for days and weeks and months afterward I lost myself in confounding attempts to explain the mystery. Nay, to this very hour I often puzzle myself with it. Now take away the awful fear, and my sensations at feeling the supernatural hand in mine were very similar in their strangeness to those I experienced on waking up and seeing Queequeg's pagan arm thrown round me. But at length all the past night's events soberly recurred, one by one, in fixed reality. And then I lay only alive to the comical predicament that though I tried to move his arm, unlock his bridegroom clasp, yet, sleeping as he was, he still hugged me tightly, as though naught but death should part us twain. I now strove to arouse him. "Queequeg!" His only answer was a snore. I then rolled over, my neck feeling as if it were in a horse collar, and suddenly felt a slight scratch. Throwing aside the counterpane, there lay the tomahawk sleeping by the savage's side, as if it were a hatchet-faced baby. A great pickle, truly, thought I. A bed here in a strange house in the broad day, with a cannibal and a tomahawk. Queequeg! In the name of goodness, Queequeg, wake! At length, by dint of much wriggling and loud and incessant expostulations upon the unbecomingness of his hugging a fellow male in this matrimonial sort of style, I succeeded in extracting a grunt, and presently he drew back his arm, shook himself all over like a Newfoundland dog just from the water, and sat up in bed, stiff as a pikestaff, looking at me and rubbing his eyes as if he did not altogether remember how I came to be there, though a dim consciousness of knowing something about me seemed slowly dawning over him. Meanwhile I lay quietly eyeing him, having no serious misgivings now, and bent upon narrowly observing so curious a creature. When at last his mind seemed made up touching the character of his bedfellow, he became, as it were, reconciled to the fact. He jumped out upon the floor, and by certain signs and sounds gave me to understand that, if it pleased me, he would dress first, and then leave me to dress afterwards, leaving the whole apartment to myself. Thinks I, Queequeg, under the circumstances, this is a very civilized overture, but the truth is, these savages have an innate sense of delicacy, say what you will. It is marvellous how essentially polite they are. I pay this particular compliment to Queequeg because he treats me with so much civility and consideration, while I was guilty of great rudeness, staring at him from the bed and watching all his toilette motions, for the time my curiosity getting the better of my breeding. Nevertheless, a man like Queequeg you don't see every day. He and his ways were well worth unusual regarding. He commenced dressing out top by yawning his beaver hat, a very tall one, by the by, and then, still minus his trousers, he hunted up his boots. What under the heavens he did it for, I cannot tell, but his next movement was to crush himself, boots in hand and hat on, under the bed, when, from sundry violent gaspings and strainings, I inferred he was hard at work booting himself, though by no law of propriety that I ever heard of is any man required to be private when putting on his boots. But Queequeg, do you see, was a creature in the transition stage, neither caterpillar nor butterfly. He was just enough civilized to show off his outlandishness in the strangest possible manners. His education was not yet completed. He was an undergraduate. If he had not been a small degree civilized, he very probably would not have troubled himself with boots at all. But then, if he had not been still a savage, he never would have dreamt of getting under the bed to put them on. At last he emerged with his hat very much dented and crushed down over his eyes, and began creaking and limping about the room, as if, not being much accustomed to boots, his pair of damp, wrinkled cowhide ones, probably not made to order either, rather pinched and tormented him at the first go-off of a bitter cold morning. Seeing now that there were no curtains to the windows, and that the street being very narrow, the house opposite commanded a plain view into the room, and observing more and more the indecorous figure that Queequeg made, slaving about with little else but his hat and boots on, I begged him as well as I could to accelerate his toilet somewhat, and particularly to get into his pantaloons as soon as possible. He complied and then proceeded to wash himself. At that time in the morning any Christian would have washed his face, but Queequeg, to my amazement, contented himself with restricting his ablutions to his chest, arms, and hands. He then donned his waistcoat, and taking up a piece of hard soap on the washstand centre table, dipped it into water and commenced lathering his face. I was watching to see where he kept his razor, when lo and behold, he takes the harpoon from the bed corner, slips out the long wooden stock, unsheathes the head, wets it a little on his boot, and striding up to the bit of mirror against the wall, begins a vigorous scraping, or rather harpooning, of his cheeks. Thinks I, Queequeg, this is using Roger's best cutlery with a vengeance. Afterwards, I wondered the less at this operation when I came to know of what fine steel the head of a harpoon is made, and how exceedingly sharp the long straight edges are always kept. The rest of his toilet was soon achieved, and he proudly marched out of the room, wrapped up in his great pilot monkey jacket, and sporting his harpoon like a marshal's baton. I quickly followed suit, and descended into the bar-room, accosted the grinning landlord very pleasantly. I cherished no malice towards him, though he had been skylarking with me not a little in the matter of my bedfellow. However, a good laugh is a mighty good thing, and rather too scarce a good thing. The more's the pity. So if any one man in his own proper person affords stuff for a good joke to anybody, let him not be backward, but let him cheerfully allow himself to spend and be spent in that way. And the man that has anything bountifully laughable about him, be sure there is more in that man than you perhaps think for. The bar-room was now full of the boarders who had been dropping the night previous, and whom I had not yet had a good look at. They were nearly all whalemen, chief mates and second mates, and third mates, and sea carpenters, and sea coopers, and sea blacksmiths, and harpooners, and shipkeepers, a brown and brawny company with bosky beards, an unshorn shaggy set, all wearing monkey jackets for morning gowns. You could pretty plainly tell how long each one had been ashore. This young fellow's healthy cheek is like a sun-toasted pear in hue, and would seem to smell almost as musky. He cannot have been 3 days land from his Indian voyage. The man next to him looks a few shades lighter. You might say a touch of satin wood is in him, and the complexion of a third still lingers a tropic tawn, but slightly bleached withal. He doubtless has tarried whole weeks ashore, but who could show a cheek like Queequeg, which, barred with various tints, seemed like Andes's western slope, to show forth in one array contrasting climates, zone by zone. "Grub ho!" now cried the landlord, flinging open a door, and in we went to breakfast. They say that men who have seen the world thereby become quite at ease in manner, quite self-possessed in company. Not always, though. Ledyard, the great New England traveller, and Mungo Park, the Scotch one, of all men, they possess the least assurance in the parlour, but perhaps the mere crossing of Siberia in a sledge, drawn by dogs as Ledyard did, or taking the long solitary walk on an empty stomach in the heart of Africa, which was the sum of poor Mungo's performances, this kind of travel, I say, may not be the very best mode of attaining a high social polish. Still, for the most part, that sort of thing is to be had anywhere. These reflections just here are occasioned by the circumstance that after we were all seated at the table, and I was preparing to hear some good stories about whaling, to my no small surprise, nearly every man maintained a profound silence. Not only that, they looked embarrassed. Yes, here were a set of sea dogs, many of whom, without the slightest bashfulness, had boarded great whales in the high seas, entire strangers to them, and duelled them dead without winking, and yet here they sat at a social breakfast table, all of the same calling, all of kindred tastes, looking round as sheepishly at each other as though they could never have been out of sight of some sheepfold among the Green Mountains. A curious sight, these bashful bears, these timid warrior whalemen. But as for Queequeg, why, Queequeg sat there among them at the head of the table too, if it so chanced, as cool as an icicle. To be sure, I cannot say much for his breeding. His greatest admirer could not have cordially justified his bringing his harpoon into breakfast with him and using it there without ceremony, reaching over the table with it, to the imminent jeopardy of many heads, and grappling the beefsteaks towards him. But that was certainly very coolly done by him, and everyone knows that in Muswell's estimation, to do anything coolly is to do it genteelly. We will not speak of all Queequeg's peculiarities here, how he eschewed coffee and hot rolls, and applied his undivided attention to beefsteaks done rare. Enough that when breakfast was over he withdrew like the rest into the public room, lighted a smoke pipe, and was sitting there quietly digesting and smoking, with his inseparable hat on, when I sallied out for a stroll. If I had been astonished at first catching a glimpse of so outlandish an individual as Queequeg circulating among the polite society of a civilized town, that astonishment soon departed upon taking my first daylight stroll through the streets of New Bedford. In thoroughfares nigh the docks, any considerable seaport will frequently offer to view the queerest-looking nondescripts from foreign parts. Even in Broadway and Chestnut streets, Mediterranean mariners will sometimes jostle the affrighted ladies. Regent Street is not unknown to Lascars and Malays, and at Bombay and the Apollo Green, live Yankees have often scared natives. But New Bedford beats all Water Street and Wapping. In these last-mentioned haunts you see only sailors, but in New Bedford, actual cannibals stand chatting at street corners, savages outright, many of whom yet carry on their bones unholy flesh. It makes a stranger stare. But besides the Fijians, Togataboas, Erromangoans, Penantians, and Brigians, and besides the wild specimens of the whaling craft which unheeded reel about the streets, you will see other sights still more curious, certainly more comical. There weekly arrive in this town scores of green Vermonters and New Hampshire men, all athirst for gain and glory in the fishery. They are mostly young, of stalwart frames, fellows who have felled forests and now seek to drop the axe and snatch the whale lance. Many are as green as the Green Mountains whence they came. In some things you would think them but a few hours old. Look there, that chap strutting round the corner. He wears a beaver hat and swallow-tailed coat, girdled with a sailor belt and sheath knife. Here comes another with a sou'wester and a bombazine cloak. No town-bred dandy will compare with a country-bred one. I mean a downright bumpkin dandy. A fellow that in the dog days will mow his 2 acres in buckskin gloves for fear of tanning his hands. Now, when a country dandy like this takes it into his hand to make a distinguished reputation and joins the great whale fishery, you should see the comical things he does upon reaching the seaport. In bespeaking his sea outfit, he orders bell-buttons to his waistcoat, straps to his canvas trousers. Ah, poor hayseed, how bitterly will burst those straps in the first howling gale when thou art driven, straps, buttons and all, down the throat of the tempest. But think not that this famous town has only harpooners, cannibals, and bumpkins to show her visitors. Not at all. Still, New Bedford is a queer place. Had it not been for us whalemen, that tract of land would this day perhaps have been in as howling condition as the coast of Labrador. As it is, parts of her back country are enough to frighten one, they look so bony. The town itself is perhaps the dearest place to live in all New England. It is a land of oil, true enough, but not like Canaan, a land also of corn and wine. The streets do not run with milk, nor in the springtime do they pave with fresh eggs. Yet, in spite of this, nowhere in all America will you find more patrician-like houses, parks and gardens more opulent than in New Bedford. Whence came they? How planted upon this once scraggy scoria of a country? Go and gaze upon the iron emblematical harpoons round yonder lofty mansion, and your question will be answered. Yes, all these brave houses and flowery gardens came from the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans. One and all they were harpooned and dragged up hither from the bottom of the sea. Can Herr Alexander perform a feat like that? In New Bedford, fathers, they say, give whales for dowers to their daughters and portion off their nieces with a few porpoises apiece. You must go to New Bedford to see a brilliant wedding, for they say there are reservoirs of oil in every house, and every night recklessly burn their legs in spermaceti candles. In summertime the town is sweet to see, full of fine maples, fields, long avenues of green and gold, and in August, high in air, the beautiful and bountiful horse-chestnuts, candelabra-wise, proffer the passer-by their tapering upright cones of segregated blossoms. So omnipotent is art, which, in many a district of New Bedford, has superinduced bright terraces of flowers upon the barren refuse rocks thrown aside at creation's final day. And the women of New Bedford, they bloom like their own red roses. But roses only bloom in summer, whereas the fine carnation of their cheeks is perennial as sunlight in the seventh heavens. Elsewhere match the bloom of theirs ye cannot, save in Salem, where they tell me the young girls breathe such musk, their sailor sweethearts smell them miles offshore, as though they were drawing nigh the odorous Moluccas instead of the puritanic sands. In this same New Bedford there stands a whaleman's chapel, and few are the moody fishermen, shortly bound for the Indian Ocean or Pacific, who fail to make a Sunday visit to the spot. I am sure that I did not. Returning from my first morning stroll, I again sallied out upon this special errand. The sky had changed from clear, sunny gold to driving sleet and mist. Wrapping myself in my shaggy jacket of the cloth called bearskin, I fought my way against the stubborn storm. Entering, I found a small, scattered congregation of sailors and sailors' wives and widows. A muffled silence reigned, only broken at times by the shrieks of the storm. Each silent worshipper seemed purposely sitting apart from the other, as if silent grief were insular and incommunicable. The chaplain had not yet arrived, and there, these silent islands of men and women sat steadfastly eyeing several marble tablets, with black borders masoned into the wall on either side the pulpit. 3 of them ran something like the following, I do not pretend to quote. Sacred to the memory of John Talbot, who at the age of 18 was lost overboard near the Isle of Desolation off Patagonia, November 1st, 1836. This tablet is erected to his memory by his sister. Sacred to the memory of Robert Long, Willis Ellery, Nathan Coleman, Walter Canny, Seth Macy, and Samuel Gleig, forming one of the boat's crews of the ship Eliza, who were towed out of sight by a whale on the offshore ground of the Pacific, December 31st, 1839. This marble is here placed by their surviving shipmates. Sacred to the memory of the late Captain Ezekiel Hardy, who in the bows of his boat was killed by a sperm whale off the coast of Japan, August 3rd, 1833. This tablet is sacred, erected to his memory by his widow. Shaking off the sleet from my ice-glazed hat and jacket, I seated myself near the door, and turning sideways was surprised to see Queequeg near me. Affected by the solemnity of the scene, there was a wondering gaze of incredulous curiosity at his countenance. This savage was the only person present who seemed to notice my entrance, because he was the only one who could not read, and therefore was not reading those frigid inscriptions on the wall. Whether any of the relatives of the seamen whose names appeared there were now among the congregation, I would not. But so many are the unrecorded accidents in the fishery, and so plainly did several women present wear the countenance, if not the trappings, of some unceasing grief, that I feel sure that here before me were assembled those in whose unhealing hearts the sight of those bleak tablets sympathetically caused the old wounds to bleed afresh. O ye whose dead lie buried beneath the green grass, who standing among flowers can say, Here, here lies my beloved. Ye know not the desolation that broods in bosoms like these. What bitter blanks in those black-bordered marbles which cover no ashes. What despair in those immovable inscriptions. What deadly voids and unbidden infidelities in the lines that seem to gnaw upon all faith and refuse resurrections to the beings whose places they perish without a grave. As well might those tablets stand in the cave of Elephanta as here. In what census of living creatures the dead of mankind are included, Why it is that a universal proverb says of them that they tell no tales, though containing more secrets than the Goodwin Sands. How it is that to his name we yesterday departed for the other world with prefix, so significant and infidel a word, and yet do not thus entitle him, if he but embarks for the remotest Indies of this living earth. Why the life insurance companies pay death forfeitures upon immortals, in what eternal unstirring paralysis and deadly hopeless trance yet lies antique Adam, who died 60 centuries ago. How it is that we still refuse to be comforted for those who we nevertheless maintain are dwelling in unspeakable bliss? Why all the living so strive to hush all the dead? Wherefore but the rumour of a knocking in a tomb will terrify a whole city? All these things are not without their meanings. But faith, like a jackal, feeds among the tombs, and even from these dead doubts she gathers her most vital hope. It needs scarcely to be told. With what feelings on the eve of an Nantucket voyage I regarded those marble tablets, and by the murky light of that darkened, doleful day read the fate of the whaleman who had gone before me. Yes, Ishmael, the same fate may be thine, but somehow I grow merry again. Delightful inducements to embark. Fine chance for promotion, it seems. Aye, a stow-boat will make me an immortal by brevet. Yes, there is death in this business of whaling, a speechlessly quick, chaotic bundling of a man into eternity. But what then? Methinks we are hugely mistaken in this matter of life and death. Methinks that what they call my shadow here on earth is my true substance. Methinks that in looking at things spiritual we are too much like oysters observing the sun through the water, and thinking that thick water the thinnest of air. Methinks my body is but the lees of my better being. In fact, take my body who will. Take it, I say. It is not me, and therefore 3 cheers for Nantucket, and come a stow-boat and stow-body when they will, for stave my soul. Jove himself cannot. I had not been seated very long ere a man of a certain venerable robustness entered, immediately as the storm-pelted floor flew back upon admitting him. A quick, regardful eyeing of him by all the congregation sufficiently attested that this fine old man was the chaplain. Yes, it was the famous Father Mapple, so called by the whalemen, among whom he was a very great favourite. He had been a sailor and a harpooner in his youth, but for many years past had dedicated his life to the ministry. At the time I now write of, Father Mapple was in the hardy winter of a healthy old age, that sort of old age which seems merging into a second flowering youth, for among the fissures of his wrinkles there shone certain mild gleams of a newly developing bloom. The spring verdure peeping forth even beneath February's snow. No one having previously heard his history could for the first time behold Father Mapple without the utmost interest, because there were certain engrafted clerical peculiarities about him, imputable to that adventurous maritime life he had led. When he entered I observed that he carried no umbrella, and certainly did not come in his carriage, for his tarpaulin hat ran down with melting sleet, and his great pilot cloth jacket seemed almost to drag him to the floor with the weight of the water it had absorbed. However, hat and coat and overshoes were one by one removed, and hung up in a little space in an adjacent corner when, arrayed in a decent suit, he quickly approached the pulpit. Like most old-fashioned pulpits, it was a very lofty one. Its irregular stairs to such a height would, by its long angle with the floor, seriously contract the already small area of the chapel. The architect, it seemed, had acted upon the hint of Father Mapple had finished the pulpit without a stairs, substituting a perpendicular side ladder like those used in mounting a ship from a boat at sea. The wife of a whaling captain had provided the chapel with a handsome pair of red worsted man-ropes for this ladder, which, being itself nicely headed and stained with a mahogany colour, the whole contrivance, considering what manner of chapel it was, seemed by no means in bad taste. Halting for an instant at the foot of the ladder, and with both hands grasping the ornamental knobs of the man-ropes, Father Mapple cast a look upward, and then, with a truly sailor-like but still reverential dexterity, hand over hand, mounted the steps as if ascending the main top of his vessel. "Hello there, Ash. How are you doing today?" The perpendicular parts of this side ladder, as is usually the case with swingy ones, were of cloth-covered rope. Only the rounds were of wood, so that at every step there was a joint. At my first glance of the pulpit, it had not escaped me that, however convenient for a ship, these joints in the present instance seemed unnecessary. But I was not prepared to see Father Mapple after gaining the height, slowly turn around and, stooping over the pulpit, deliberately drag up the ladder step by step, till the whole was deposited within, leaving him impregnable in his little Quebec. I pondered some time without fully comprehending the reason for this. Father Mapple enjoyed such a wide reputation for sincerity and sanctity that I could not suspect him of courting notoriety by any mere trick of the stage. No, thought I, there must be some sober reason for this thing. Furthermore, it must symbolize something unseen. Can it be, then, that by that act of physical isolation he signifies his spiritual withdrawal for the time from all outward worldly ties and connections? Yes, replenished with the meat and wine of the word, for the faithful man of God, this pulpit I see as a self-containing stronghold, a lofty Ehrenbreitstein, with a perennial well of water within the walls. I'm glad to hear you're doing well. And I do hope you'll continue to enjoy the story indeed. But the side ladder was not the only strange feature of the place, borrowed from the chaplain's former seafarings. Between the marble cenotaphs on either side of the pulpit, the wall which formed its back was adorned with a large painting representing a gallant ship beating against a terrible storm off a lee coast of black rocks and snowy breakers. But above the flying scud and dark rolling clouds there floated a little isle of sunlight, from which beamed forth an angel's face, and this bright face shed a distinct spot of radiance upon the ship's tossed deck, something like that silver plate now inserted into the Victory's plank when Nelson fell. Ah, noble ship, the angel seemed to say, beat on, thou noble ship, and bear a hardy helm, for lo, the sun is breaking through, the clouds are rolling off, serenest azure is at hand. Nor was puppet itself without a trace of the same sea taste that had achieved the ladder and the picture. Its panelled front was in the likeness of a ship's bluff bows, and the Holy Bible rested on a projecting piece of scrollwork, fashioned after a ship's fiddle-headed beak. What could be more full of meaning? The pulpit is ever this earth's foremost part. All the rest comes in its rear. The pulpit leads the world. From thence it is the storm of God's quick wrath that is first descried, and the bow must bear the earliest brunt. From thence it is the god of breezes, fair or foul, is first invoked for favourable winds. Yes, the world's a ship on its passage out, and not a voyage complete, and the pulpit is its prow. Father Mapple rose, and in a mild voice of unassuming authority ordered the scattered people to condense. Starboard gangway there, side away to larboard, larboard gangway to starboard. Midships, midships. There was a low rumbling of heavy sea boots among the benches, and still the slighter shuffling of women's shoes, and all was quiet again, and every eye on the preacher. He paused a little, then, kneeling in the pulpit's bows, folded his large brown hands across his chest, uplifted his closed eyes, and offered a prayer so deeply devout that he seemed kneeling and praying at the bottom of the sea. This ended in prolonged solemn tones, like the continual tolling of a bell in a ship that is foundering at sea in a fog. In such tones he commenced reading the following hymn, but changing his manner towards the concluding stanzas, burst forth with appealing exultation and joy. The ribs and terrors in the whale arched over me a dismal gloom, while all God's sunlit waves rolled by and lifted me deepening down to doom. I saw the opening maw of hell, with endless pains and sorrows there, which none but they that feel can tell. Oh, I was plunging to despair. In black distress I called my God. When I could scarce believe him mine, he bowed his ear to my complaints. No more the wail did me confine. With speed he flew to my relief, as on a radiant dolphin borne, awful yet bright, as lightning shone, the face of my deliverer God. My song forever shall recall that terrible, that joyful hour. I give the glory to my God. His all the mercy and the power. Nearly all joined in singing this hymn, which swelled high above the howling of the storm. A brief pause ensued. The preacher slowly turned over the leaves of the Bible and at last, folding his hand down upon the proper page, said, "Beloved shipmates, clinch the last verse of the first chapter of Jonah." And God had prepared a great fish to swallow up Jonah. Shipmates, this book, containing only 4 chapters, 4 yarns, is one of the smallest strands in the mighty cable of the Scriptures. Yet what depths of the soul does Jonah's deep sea line sound? What a pregnant lesson to us is this prophet! What a noble thing is that canticle in the fish's belly! How billow-like and boisterously grand! We feel the flood surging over us, we sound with him to the kelpy bottom of the waters, seaweed and all the slime of the sea is about us. But what is this lesson that the book of Jonah teaches? Shipmates, it is a two-stranded lesson. A lesson to us all as sinful men, and a lesson to me as a pilot of the living God. As sinful men is a lesson to us all, because it is a story of the sin, hard-heartedness, and suddenly awaking fears, the swift punishment, repentance, prayers, and finally the deliverance and joy of Jonah. As with all sinners among men, the sin of this son of Amittai was in his willful disobedience of the command of God. Never mind now what the command was or how conveyed, when she found a hard command. But all the things that God would have us do are hard for us to do. Remember that. And hence, he oftener commands us than endeavours to persuade. And if we obey God, we must disobey ourselves. And it is in this disobeying ourselves wherein the hardness of obeying God consists. With this sin of disobedience in him, Jonah still further flouts at God by seeking to flee from him. He thinks that a ship made by men will carry him into countries where God does not reign, but only the captains of this earth. He skulks about the wharves of Joppa. He seeks a ship that's bound for Tarshish, where lurks perhaps a hitherto unheeded meaning here. By all accounts, possibly. By all accounts, Tarshish could have been no other city than the modern Cadiz. That's the opinion of learned men. But where is Cadiz, shipmates? Cadiz is in Spain, as far by water from Joppa as Jonah could possibly have sailed in those ancient days when the Atlantic was an almost unknown sea. Because Joppa, the modern Jaffa, shipmates, is on the most easterly coast of the Mediterranean. The Syrian and Tarshish or Cadiz more than 2,000 miles. To the westward from that, just outside the Straits of Gibraltar. See ye not then, shipmates, that Jonah sought to flee worldwide from God? Miserable man, oh, most contemptible and worthy of all scorn, with slouched hat and guilty eye, skulking from his God, prowling among the shipping like a vile burglar hastening to cross the seas, so disordered, self-condemning is his look, that had there been policemen in those days, Jonah, on the mere suspicion of something wrong, had been arrested ere he touched a deck. How plainly he's a fugitive. No baggage, not a hat-box, valise, or carpet-bag. No friends accompany him to the wharf with their adieu. At last, after much dodging search, he finds the Tarshish ship, receiving the last items of a cargo. And as he steps on board to see its captain in the cabin, all the sailors for the moment desist from hoisting in the gourds to mark the stranger's evil eye. Jonah sees this, but in vain he tries to look all ears and confidence. In vain essays his wretched smile. Strong intuitions of the man assure the mariners he can be no innocent. In their gamesome but still serious way, one whispers to the other, "Jack, he's robbed a widow," or "Joe, do you mark him? He's a bigamist," or "Harry, lad, I guess he's the adulterer that broke jail in old Gomorrah," or belike, "one of the missing murderers from Sodom." Another runs to read the bale that's stuck against the spile upon the wharf to which the ship is moored, offering 500 gold coins for the apprehension of a parricide and containing a description of his person. He leans and looks from Jonah to the bale, while all of his sympathetic shipmates now crowd round Jonah, preparing to lay their hands upon him. Frightened Jonah trembles, and summoning all his boldness to his face, only looks so much the more a coward. He will not confess himself suspected, but that itself is strong suspicion. So he makes the best of it, and when the sailors find him not to be the man that is advertised, they let him pass, and he descends into the cabin. "Who's there?" cries the captain at his busy desk, hurriedly making out his papers for the customs. "Who's there?" Oh, how that harmless question mangles Jonah. For the instant he almost turns to flee again, but he rallies. "I take a passage in the ship to Tarshish. How soon sail ye, sir?" Thus far the busy captain had not looked up to Jonah, though the man now stands before him, but no sooner does he hear the hollow voice than he darts a scrutinizing glance. "We sail with the next coming tide." At last he slowly answered, still intently eyeing him. "No sooner, sir?" "Soon enough for any honest man that goes a passenger." "Ha!" Jonah answered another stab, but he swiftly calls away the captain from that scent. "I'll sail with you," he says. "The passage money, how much is that?" "I'll pay now. For it is particularly written, shipmates, that if it were a thing not to be overlooked in its history, that he paid the fare thereof, ere the craft did sail, and taken with the context that this is full of meaning. Now, Jonah's captain, shipmates, was one of whose discernment detects crime in any, but whose cupidity exposes it only in the penniless. In this world, shipmates, sin that pays its way can travel freely and without a passport, whereas virtue, if a pauper is stopped at all frontiers. So Jonah's captain prepares to test the length of Jonah's purse, ere he judge him openly. He charges him thrice the usual sum, and it's assented to. Then the captain knows that Jonah is a fugitive, but at the same time resolves to help a flight that paves its rear with gold. Yet, when Jonah fairly takes out the purse, prudent suspicion still molests the captain. He rings every coin to find a counterfeit. "Not a forger, anyway," he mutters, and Jonah is put down for his passage. "Point out my stateroom, sir," says Jonah now. "I'm travel-weary, I need sleep." "Thou lookest like it," says the captain. "There's thy room." Jonah enters and would lock the door, but the lock contains no key. Having him foolishly fumbling there, the captain laughs lowly to himself, and mutters something about the doors of convict cells never being allowed to be locked within. All dressed and dusty as he is, Jonah throws himself into his berth, and finds the little stateroom ceiling almost resting on his forehead. The air is close, and Jonah gasps. Then, in that contracted hole, sunk to beneath the ship's waterline, Jonah feels the heralding presentiment of that stifling hour, when the whale shall hold him in the smallest of his bowels wards. Screwed at his axis against the side, a swinging lamp slightly oscillates in Jonah's room, and the ship, heeling over towards the wharf with the weight of the last bales received, the lamp, flame and all, though in slight motion, still maintains a permanent obliquity with reference to the room, though in truth infallibly straight itself. It but made obvious the false, lying levels among which it hung. The lamp alarms and frightens Jonah as, lying in his berth, his tormented eyes roll around the place, and this thus far successful fugitive finds no refuge for his restless glance. But that contradiction in the lamp more and more appalls him. The floor, the ceiling, and the side are all awry. "Oh, my conscience hangs in me," he groans, "straight upwards, so it burns, but the chambers of my soul are all in crookedness." "Welcome, darling. Congratulations on being first. How are you doing today? Now a stream." Like one who after a night of drunken revelry hies to his bed, still reeling, but with conscience still yet pricking him, at the plungings of the Roman racehorse, but so much more the strike his steel tags into him, as one who in that miserable plight still turns and turns in giddy anguish, praying God for annihilation until the fit be past, and at last, amid the whirl of woe he feels, a deep stupor steals over him, as over the man who bleeds to death. The conscience is the wound, and there's naught to staunch it. So, after sore wrestlings in his birth, Jonah's prodigy of ponderous misery drags him drowning down to sleep. I'm glad it went away. Some of the puzzles in Every Cycle definitely can get obtuse. But that also is part of the element of its branching pathways. Even if you cannot really do the whole puzzles, you can still reach the end, which is very important. And indeed, one must always have as many resources as possible. And I'm deeply looking forward to it. And now the time of tide has come. The ship casts off her cables, and from the deserted wharf the uncheered ship for Tarshish, all careening, glides to sea. That ship, my friends, was the first of recorded smugglers. The contraband was Jonah. But the sea rebels, he will not bear the wicked burden. A dreadful storm comes on, the ship is like to break. But now, when the boatswain calls all hands to lighten her, when boxes, bales, and jars are clattering overboard, when the wind is shrieking, and the men are yelling, and every plank thunders with trampling feet right over Jonah's head, in all this raging tumult, Jonah sleeps his hideous sleep. He sees no black sky and raging sea, feels not the reeling timbers, and little hears he or heeds he the far rush of the mighty whale, which, even now, with open mouth is cleaving the seas after him. Aye, shipmates, Jonah was gone down to the sides of the ship, a berth in the cabin as I have taken it, and was fast asleep. But the right master comes to him, and shrieks in his dead ear, "What meanest thou, sleeper? Arise!" Startled from his lethargy by that direful cry, Jonah staggers to his feet, and stumbling to the deck grasps a shroud to look out upon the sea. But at that moment he is sprung upon by a panther billow leaping over the bulwarks. Wave after wave thus leaps into the ship, and finding no speedy vent runs roaring fore and aft, till the mariners come nigh to drowning while yet afloat. And ever as the white moon shows her affrighted face from the steep gullies in the blackness overhead, aghast Jonah sees the rearing bowsprit pointing high upward, but soon beats downward again towards the tormented deep. Terrors upon terrors runs shouting through his soul. In all his cringing attitudes, the gone fugitive is now too plainly known. The sailors mark him more and more certain, grow their suspicions of him, and at last, fully to test the truth by referring the whole matter to high heaven, they fall to casting lots to see for whose cause this great tempest was upon them. The lot is Jonah's. That discovered, then how furiously they mob him with their questions. What is thine occupation? Whence comest thou? Thy country? What people? But mark now, my shipmates, the behaviour of poor Jonah. The eager mariners but ask him who he is, and where from, whereas they not only receive an answer to those questions, but likewise another answer to a question not put by them. But the unsolicited answer is forced from Jonah by the hard hand of God that is upon him. I am a Hebrew, he cries, and then, I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, who hath made the sea and the land dry, and the dry land. I fear him, O Jonah? Aye, well mightest thou fear the Lord God then. Straightway he now goes on to make a full confession, whereupon the mariners became more and more appalled, but still are pitiful. For when Jonah, not yet supplicating God for mercy, since he but too well knew the darkness of his deserts, When wretched Jonah cries out to them to take him and cast him forth into the sea, for he knew that for his sake this great tempest was upon them, they mercifully turn from him and seek by other means to save the ship, but all in vain. The indignant gale howls louder then, with one hand raised invokingly to God, with the other they not unreluctantly lay hold of Jonah. And now behold Jonah taken up as an anchor and dropped into the sea, when instantly an oily calmness floats out from the east, and the sea is still, as Jonah carries down the gale with him, leaving smooth water behind. He goes down in the whirling heart, such a merciless commotion that he scarce heeds the moment when he drops seething into the yawning jaws awaiting him, and the whale shoots through all his ivory teeth, like so many white bolts upon his prison. Then Jonah prayed unto the Lord out of the fish's belly, would observe his prayer and learn a weighty lesson. For sinful as he is, Jonah does not weep and wail for direct deliverance. He feels that his dreadful punishment is just. He leaves all his deliverance to God, contenting himself with this, that spite for all his pains and pangs, he will still look towards his holy empire, and here, shipmates, his true and faithful repentance, not clamorous for pardon, but grateful for punishment. And how pleasing to God was this conduct in Jonah is shown in the eventual deliverance of him from the sea and the whale. Shipmates, I do not place Jonah before you to be copied for his sin, but I do place him before you as a model for repentance. Sin not, but if you do, take heed to repent of it, like Jonah. While he was speaking these words, the howling of the shrieking, slanting storm without seemed to add new power to the preacher, who, when describing Jonah's sea storm, seemed tossed by a storm himself. His deep chest heaved as with a ground-swell, his tossed arms seemed the warring elements at work, and the thunders that rolled away from off his swarthy brow, and the light leaping from his eye, made all his simple hearers look on him with a quick fear that was strange to them. There now came a lull in his look, as he silently turned over the leaves of the book once more, and at last, standing motionless, with closed eyes for a moment, seemed communicating with God and himself. But again he leaned over towards the people, and bowing his head lowly with an aspect of the deepest yet manliest humility, he spake these words: Shipmates, God has laid but one hand upon you, both his hands press upon me. I have read ye by what murking light may be mine the lesson that Jonah teaches to all sinners, and therefore to ye, and still more to me, for I am a greater sinner than ye. And now how gladly would I come down from this masthead and sit on the hatches where you sit, and listen as you listened, while some one of you reads me that other and more awful lesson which Jonah teaches to me as a pilot of the living God. How being an anointed pilot prophet, or speaker of true things, and bidden by the Lord to sound those unwelcome truths in the ears of the wicked Nineveh, Jonah, appalled at the hostility he should raise, fled from his mission and sought to escape his duty and his God by taking the ship at Joppa. But God is everywhere. Tarshish he never reached, and as we have seen, God came upon him in the whale and swallowed him down to living gulfs of doom, and with swift slantings tore him along into the midst of the seas, where the eddying depths sucked him 10,000 fathoms down, and the weeds were wrapped about his head, and all the watery world of woe bowled over him. Yet even then, beyond the reach of any plummet, out of the belly of hell, when the whale grounded upon the ocean's utmost bones, even then God heard the engulfed, repenting prophet when he cried. Then God spake unto the fish, and from the shuddering cold and blackness of the sea, the whale came breaching up towards the warm and pleasant sun, and all the delights of air and earth, and vomited out Jonah upon the dry land. When the word of the Lord came a second time, and Jonah, bruised and beaten, his ears like two seashells, still multitudinously murmuring of the ocean, Jonah did the Almighty's bidding. And what was that, shipmates? To preach the truth to the face of falsehood. That was it. This, shipmates, this is that other lesson, and woe to that pilot of the living God who slights it. Woe to him whose world charms from gospel duty. Woe to him who seeks to pour oil upon the waters when God has brewed them into a gale. Woe to him who seeks to please rather than to appall. Woe to him whose good name is more to him than goodness. Woe to him who in this world courts not dishonor. Woe to him who would not be true even though to be false were salvation. Yea, woe to him who, as the great pilot Paul has it, while preaching to others is himself a castaway. He dropped and fell from himself for a moment. Then lifting his face to them again showed a deep joy in his eyes as he cried out with a heavy enthusiasm, But oh, shipmates, on the starboard hand of every woe there is a sure delight, and higher the top of that delight, and the bottom of the woe is deep. Is not the main truck higher than the kelson is low? Delight is to him a far, far upward and inward delight, who against the proud gods and commodores of this earth ever stands forth in his own inexorable self. Delight is to him whose strong arms yet support him, when the ships of this base, treacherous world has gone down beneath him. Delight is to him who gives no quarter in the truth, and kills, burns, and destroys all sin, though we pluck it out from under the robes of senators and judges. Delight, top gallant delight, is to him who acknowledges no law or lord, but the Lord is God, and is only a patriot to heaven. Delight is to him all the waves of the billows of the seas, or the boisterous mob can never shake from this sure keel of the ages, and eternal delight and deliciousness will be his, coming to lay him down and say with his final breath, O Father, chiefly known to me by thy rod, mortal or immortal, here I die. I have striven to be thine more than to be this world's or mine own, yet this is nothing. I leave eternity to thee, for what is man, that he should live out the lifetime of his God? He said no more, but slowly waving a benediction covered his face with his hands, and so remained kneeling, till all the people had departed, and he was left alone in the place. Returning to the spouter inn from the chapel, I found Queequeg there quite alone. He had been left the chapel before the benediction some time. He was sitting on a bench before the fire with his feet on the stove hearth, and in one hand was holding close up to his face that little idol of his, peering hard into his face, and with a jackknife gently whittling away at its nose, meanwhile humming to himself in his heathenish way. But being now interrupted, he put up the image, and pretty soon, going to the table, took up a large book there, and placing it on his lap, began counting the pages with deliberate regularity. At every 50th page, as I fancied, stopping a moment, looking vacantly around him, and giving utterance to a long-drawn gurgling whistle of astonishment. He would then begin again at the next 50, seeming to commence at number 1 each time, as though he could not count more than 50. It was only by such a large number of 50s being found together that his astonishment at the multitude of pages was excited. With much interest I sat watching him. Savage though he was, and hideously marred about the face, at least to my taste, his countenance yet had a something in it which was by no means disagreeable. You cannot hide the soul. Through all his unearthly tattooings, I thought I saw the traces of a simple, honest heart, and in his large, deep eyes, fiery black and bold, there seemed tokens of a spirit that would dare 1,000 devils. And besides all this, there was a certain lofty bearing about the pagan, which even his uncouthness could not altogether maim. He looked like a man who had never cringed and never had a creditor. Whether it was, too, that his head being shaved, his forehead was drawn out in freer and brighter relief, and not more expansive than it otherwise would, this I will not venture to decide, but certain it was his head was phrenologically an excellent one. It may seem ridiculous, but it reminded me of General Washington's head. I have seen the popular busts of him, and of the same long, regularly graded retreating slope from above the brows, which were likewise very projecting. like two long promontories, thickly wooded on top. Queequeg was George Washington cannibalistically developed. Whilst I was thus closely scanning him, half pretending meanwhile to be looking out at the storm from the casement, he never heeded my presence, never troubled himself with so much as a single glance, but appeared wholly occupied with counting the pages of the marvellous book. Considering how sociably we had been sleeping together the night previous, and especially considering the affectionate arm I had found thrown over me upon waking in the morning, I thought this indifference of his very strange. But savages are strange beings. At times you do not know exactly how to take them. At first they are overawing. Their calm self-collectedness and simplicity seemed Socratic wisdom. I had noticed also that Queequeg never consorted at all, or but very little, with the other seamen at the inn. He made no advances whatsoever, appeared to have no desire to enlarge the circle of his acquaintances. All this struck me as mighty singular, yet, upon second thoughts, something almost sublime in it. Here was a man some 20,000 miles from home, by the way of Cape Horn, that is, which was the only way to get there. Thrown among the people as strange to him as though he were on the planet Jupiter, and yet he seemed entirely at his ease, preserving the utmost serenity, content with his own companionship, always equal to himself. Surely this was a touch of fine philosophy, though no doubt he had never heard there was such a thing as that. But perhaps to be true philosophers we mortals should now not be conscious of so living or so striving. So soon as I hear that such or such man gives himself out for a philosopher, I conclude that, like the dyspeptic old woman, he must have broken his digester. As I sat there in the now lonely room, the fire burning low in that mild stage when, after its first intensity has warmed the air, it then only glows to be looked at, the evening shades and phantoms gathering round the casements and peering in upon us silent, solitary twain. The storm booming without in solemn swells, I began to be sensible of strange feelings. I felt a melting in me. No more my splintered heart and maddened hand were turned against the wolfish world. This soothing savage had redeemed it. There he sat, his very indifference speaking a nature in which there lurked no civilization, no civilized hypocrisies and planned deceits. Wild he was, a very sight of sights to see, yet I began to feel myself mysteriously drawn towards him, and those same things that would have repelled most others, they were the very magnets that thus drew me. I'll try a pagan friend, thought I, since Christian kindness has proved but hollow courtesy. I drew my bench near him, and made some friendly signs and hints, doing my best to talk with him meanwhile. At first he little noticed these advances, and presently, upon my referring to his last night's hospitalities, he made out to ask me whether we were again to be bedfellows. I told him yes, whereat I thought he looked pleased, perhaps a little complimented. We then turned over the book together, and I endeavoured to explain to him what the purpose of the printing, and the meaning of the few pictures that were in it. Thus I soon engaged his interest. From that we were to jabbering the best we could about the various outer sights to be seen in this famous town. Soon I proposed a social smoke, and, producing his pouch and tomahawk, he quietly offered me a puff. And then we sat exchanging puffs from that wild pipe of his, and keeping it regularly passing between us. If there yet lurked any ice of indifference towards me in the pagan's breast, this pleasant, genial smoke we had soon thawed it out, and left us cronies. He seemed to take to me quite as naturally and unbiddenly as I to him, and when our smoke was over, he pressed his forehead against mine, clasped me round the waist, and said that henceforth we were married, meaning, in his country's phrase, that we were bosom friends. He would gladly die for me, if need should be. In a countryman, the sudden flame of friendship would have seemed far too premature, a thing to be much distrusted, but in this simple savage those old rules would not apply. After supper and another social chat and smoke, we went to our room together. He made me a present of his embalmed head, took out his enormous tobacco wallet, and groping under the tobacco drew out some $30 in silver. Then, spreading them on the table and mechanically dividing them into two equal portions, pushed one of them towards me, and said it was mine. I was going to remonstrate, but he silenced me by pouring them into my trousers pockets. I let them stay. He then went about his evening prayers, took out his idol, and removed the paper fireboard. By certain signs and symptoms, I thought he seemed anxious for me to join him, but well knowing what was to follow, I deliberated a moment whether, in case he invited me, I would comply or otherwise. I was a good Christian, born and bred in the bosom of the infallible Presbyterian Church. How then could I unite with this wild idolater in worshipping his piece of wood? But what is worship? Thought I. You suppose now, Ishmael, the magnanimous God of heaven and earth, pagans and all included, can possibly be jealous of an insignificant bit of black wood? Impossible. But what is worship? To do the will of God. That is worship. And what is the will of God? To do to my fellow man what I would have my fellow man to do to me. That is the will of God. Now, Queequeg is my fellow man. And what do I wish this Queequeg would do to me? Why, you have me in my particular Presbyterian form of worship. Consequently, I must then unite with him in his. Ergo, I must turn idolater. So I kindled the shavings, helped prop up the innocent little idol, offered him burnt biscuit with Queequeg, salaamed before him twice or thrice, kissed his nose, and that done, we undressed and went to bed, at peace with our own consciences and all the world. But we did not go to sleep without some little chat. How it is, I know not, but there is no place like a bed for confidential disclosures between friends. Man and wife, they say. They're open the very bottom of their souls to each other, and some old couples often lie and chat over old times till nearly morning. Thus, then, in our heart's honeymoon lay I and Queequeg, a cosy, loving pair. We had lain thus in bed, chatting and napping at short intervals, and Queequeg now and then affectionately throwing his brown tattooed legs over mine, and then drawing them back, so entirely sociable and free and easy were we when, at last, by reason of our confabulations, what little nappishness remained in us altogether departed, and we felt like getting up again, though daybreak was yet some way down the future. Yes, we became very wakeful, so much that our recumbent position began to grow wearisome, and by little and little we found ourselves sitting up, the clothes well tucked around us, leaning against the headboard with our 4 knees drawn up close together, and our 2 noses bending over them, as if our knee-pans were warming pans. We felt very nice and snug. The more so since it was so chilly out of doors, indeed out of bedclothes too, seeing there was no fire in the room. The more so, I say, because truly to enjoy bodily warmth, some small part of you must be cold. For there is no quality in this world that is not what it is merely by contrast. Nothing exists in itself. If you find yourself that you are all over comfortable, and have been so a long time, then you cannot be said to be comfortable any more. But if, like Queequeg and me in the bed, the tip of your nose or the crown of your head be slightly chilled, why then, indeed, in the general consciousness you feel most delightfully and unmistakably warm. For this reason, a sleeping apartment should never be furnished with a fire, which is one of the luxurious discomforts of the rich. For the height of this sort of deliciousness is to have nothing but the blanket between you and your snugness, and the cold of the outer air. There, then, you lie like the one warm spark in the heart of an Arctic crystal. We had been sitting in this crouching manner for some time, when all at once I thought I would open my eyes, for when between the sheets, whether by day or by night, and whether asleep or awake, I have always keeping my eyes shut, in order the more to concentrate the snugness of being in bed, because no man can ever feel his own identity aright, except his eyes be closed, as if darkness were indeed the proper elements of our essences, though light be more congenial to our clayey part. Upon opening my eyes, then, coming out of my own pleasant and self-created darkness into the imposed and coarse outer gloom of the unilluminated 12 o'clock at night, I experienced a disagreeable revulsion. Nor did I at all object to the hint from Queequeg that perhaps it were best to strike a light, seeing that we were so wide awake. And besides, he felt a strong desire to have a few quiet puffs from his tomahawk. Be it said, that though I had felt a strong repugnance to his smoking in the bed the night before, yet see how elastic our stiff prejudices grow when love once comes to bend them. For now I liked nothing better than to have Queequeg smoking by me, even in bed, but seemed to be full of such serene household joy then. I no more felt unduly concerned for the landlord's policy of insurance. I was only alive to the condensed confidential comfortableness of sharing a pipe and a blanket with a real friend. With our shaggy jackets drawn about our shoulders, we now passed the tomahawk from one to the other, till slowly there grew over us a blue hanging tester of smoke, illuminated by the flame of the new lit lamp. Whether it was this undulating tester rolled the savage away to far distant scenes, I know not, but he now spoke of his native island, and, eager to hear his history, I begged him to go on and tell it. He gladly complied, though at the time I but ill comprehended not a few of his words, yet subsequent disclosures, when I had become more familiar with his broken phraseology, now enabled me to present the whole story such as it may prove in the mere skeleton I gave. Queequeg was a native of Roccavoro, an island far away to the west and south. It is not down in any map, true places never are. When a new-hatched savage running wild about his native woodlands in a grass clout, followed by the nibbling goats as if he were a green sapling, even then, Queequeg's ambitious soul lurked a strong desire to see something more of Christendom than a specimen whaler or two. His father was a high chief, a king. His uncle, the high priest, and on the maternal side he boasted aunts who were the wives of unconquerable warriors. There was excellent blood in his veins. Royal stuff, though sadly vitiated, I fear, by the cannibal propensity he nourished in his untutored youth. A Sag Harbor ship visited his father's bay, and Queequeg sought passage to Christian lands, but the ship, having her full complement of seamen, spurned his suit, and naught all the king, his father's influence, could prevail. But Queequeg vowed a vow. Alone in his canoe he paddled off to a distant strait, which he knew the ship must pass through when she quitted the island. On one side was a coral reef, on the other a low tongue of land, covered with mangrove thickets that grew out into the water. Hiding his canoe still afloat among these thickets with its prow seaward, he sat down in the stern, paddle low in hand, and when the ship was gliding by, like a flash he darted out, gained her side, with one backwards dash of his foot capsized and sank his canoe, climbed up the chains, and throwing himself at full length upon the deck, grappled a ringbolt there and swore not to let it go, though hacked in pieces. In vain the captain threatened to throw him overboard, suspended a cutlass over his naked wrists. Queequeg was the son of a king, and Queequeg budged not. Struck by his desperate dauntlessness and his wild desire to visit Christendom, the captain at last relented and told him he might make himself at home. But this fine young savage, this sea prince of Wales, never saw the captain's cabin. They put him down among the sailors and made a whaleman of him. But like Tsar Peter content to toy in the shipyards of foreign cities, Queequeg disdained no seeming ignominy, if thereby he might happily gain the power of enlightening his untutored countrymen. For at bottom, so he told me, he was actuated by a profound desire to learn among the Christians the art whereby to make his people still happier than they were, and more than that, still better than they were. But alas, the practice of whalemen soon convinced him that even Christians can be both miserable and wicked, infinitely more so than all his father's heathens. Arrived at last in old Sag Harbor, and seeing what the sailors did there, and then going on to Nantucket, and seeing how they spent their wages in that place also, poor Queequeg gave it up for lost. Thought he, it's a wicked world in all meridians, I'll die a pagan. And thus, an old idolater at heart, he yet lived among these Christians, wore their clothes, and tried to talk their gibberish, hence the queer ways about him, though now some time from home. By hints I asked him whether he did not propose going back and having a coronation, since he might not consider his father dead and gone, he being very old and feeble at the last accounts. He answered no, not yet, and added that he was fearful Christianity, or rather Christians, had unfitted him for ascending the pure and undefiled throne of 30 pagan kings before him. But by and by, he said, he would return, as soon as he felt himself baptized again. For the nonce, however, he proposed to sail about, and sow his wild oats in all 4 oceans. They made a harpooner of him, and that barbed iron was in lieu of a scepter now. I asked him what might be his immediate purpose, touching his future movements. He answered to go to sea again, in his old vocation. Upon this I told him that whaling was my own design, and informed him of my intention to sail out of Nantucket, as being the most promising port for an adventuring whaleman to embark from. He at once resolved to accompany me to that island, ship aboard the same vessel, get the same watch, the same boat, the same mess with me, in short, to share my every hap, with both my hands in his, boldly dip into the potluck of both worlds. To all this I joyously assented, for besides the affection I now felt for Queequeg, he was an experienced harpooner, and as such could not fail to be of great usefulness to one who, like me, was wholly ignorant of the mysteries of whaling, though well acquainted with the sea, as known to merchant seamen. His story ended with his pipe's last dying puff. Queequeg embraced me, pressed his forehead against mine, and blowing at the light, we rolled over from each other this way and that, and very soon were sleeping. Next morning, Monday, after disposing of the embalmed hen to a barber for a block, I settled my own and comrade's bill, using, however, my comrade's money. The grinning landlord, as well as the boarders, seemed amazingly tickled at the sudden friendship which had sprung up between me and Queequeg, especially at Peter Coffin's cock and bull stories about him had previously so much alarmed me concerning the very person whom I now accompanied with. We borrowed a wheelbarrow and, embarking our things, including my own poor carpet-bag and Queequeg's canvas sack and hammock, away we went down to the Moss, the little Nantucket packet schooner moored at the wharf. As soon as we were going along, people stared, not at Queequeg so much, for they were used to seeing cannibals like him in their streets, but to seeing him and me upon such confidential terms. But we heeded them not, going along wheeling the barrow by turns, and Queequeg now and then stopping to adjust the sheath on his harpoon barbs. I asked him why he carried such a troublesome thing with him ashore, and whether all whaling ships did not find their own harpoons. To this, in substance, he replied that though what I hinted was true enough, yet he carried particular affection for his own harpoon, because it was of assured stuff. Well tried in many a mortal combat, and deeply intimate with the hearts of whales. In short, like many inland reapers and mowers who go into the farmers' meadows armed with their own scythes, though in no wise obliged to furnish them. Even so, Queequeg, for his own private reasons, preferred his own harpoon. Shifting the barrow from my hand to his, he told me a funny story about the first wheelbarrow he had ever seen. It was in Sag Harbor. The owners of his ship, it seems, had lent him one, in which to carry his heavy chest into his boarding-house. I was ignorant about the thing, though in truth he was entirely so, concerning the precise way in which to manage the barrow. Queequeg put his chest upon it, lashes it fast, and then shoulders the barrow and marches up the wharf. "Why," said I, "Queequeg, you might have known better than that, one would think. Didn't the people laugh?" Upon this he told me another story. People of his island of Rocaboca, it seems, at their wedding feast, expressed the fragrant water of young coconuts into a large stained calabash, like a punch bowl, and this punch bowl always forms the great central ornament on the braided mat where the feast is held. Now, a certain grand merchant ship once touched at Rocaboca, and its commander, from all accounts, a very stately, punctilious gentleman, at least for a sea captain. This commander was invited to the wedding feast of Queequeg's sister, a pretty young princess just turned of 10, when all the wedding guests were assembled at the bride's bamboo cottage, this captain marches in, and being assigned the post of honor, places himself over against the punch bowl between the high priest and his majesty the king. Queequeg's father, grace being said, for those people have their grace as well as we, the Queequeg told me that unlike us who at such times look downward to our platters, they, on the contrary, copying the ducks, glance upward to the great giver of all feasts. Grace, I say, being said, the high priest opens the banquet in the immemorial ceremony of the island, that is, dipping his consecrated and consecrating fingers into the bowl before the blessed beverage circulates, seeing himself placed next the priest and noting the ceremony and thinking himself, being captain of a ship, as having plain precedence over a mere island king, especially in the king's own house. The captain coolly proceeds to wash his hands in the punch bowl, taking it, I suppose, for a huge finger glass. "Now," said Queequeg, "what you think now? Didn't our people laugh?" At last, passage paid and luggage safe, we stood on board the schooner. Hoisting sail, it glided down the Acushnet River. On one side, New Bedford rose in terraces of street, their ice-covered trees all glittering in the clear, cold air. Huge hills and mountains of casks on casks were piled upon her wharves, and side by side the world-wandering whale ships lay silent and safely moored at last, while from others came a sound of carpenters and coopers, with blended noises of fires and forges to melt the pitch, all betokening that new cruises were on the start. The one most perilous and long voyage ended, only begins a second, and a second ended, only begins a third, and so on, forever and for aye. Such is the endless, yea, the intolerableness of all earthly effort. Gaining the more open water, the bracing breeze waxed fresh. The little moss tossed the quick foam from her brows as a young colt his snortings. How I snuffed that Tartar air! How I spurned that turnpike earth, that common highway all over dented with the marks of slavish heels and hoofs, and turned me to admire the magnanimity of the ocean which will permit no records. At the same foam fountain Queequeg seemed to drink and reel with me. His dusky nostrils swelled apart, he showed his filed and pointed teeth. On we flew, and our offing gained. The moss did homage to the blast, ducked and dived her bows, the sleigh before the Sultan. Sidewise leaning, we sidewise darted, every rope yarn tingling like a wire, the two tall masts buckling like Indian canes in land tornadoes. So full of this reeling scene were we as we stood by the plunging bowsprit that for some time we did not notice the jeering glances of the passengers. A lubber-like assembly who marvelled that two fellow beings should be so companionable, as though a white man were anything more dignified than a whitewashed savage. But there were some boobies and bumpkins there who, by their intense greenness, must have come from the heart and centre of all verdure. Queequeg caught one of these young saplings mimicking him behind his back. I thought the bumpkin's hour of doom was come. Dropping his harpoon, the brawny savage caught him in his arms, and by an almost miraculous dexterity and strength, sent him higher bodily into the air. Then, slightly tapping his stern in mid-somerset, the fellow landed with bursting lungs upon his feet, while Queequeg, turning his back upon him, lighted his tomahawk pipe and passed it to me for a puff. "Captain, captain!" yelled the bumpkin, running towards the officer. "Captain, captain! Here's the devil!" "Hullo, you, sir!" cried the captain, a gold rib of the sea, stalking up to Queequeg. "What in thunder do you mean by that? Don't you know you might have killed that chap?" "What him say?" said Queequeg, as he mildly turned to me. "He say," said I, "that you came near killy that man there," pointing to the still shivering greenhorn. "Killy?" cried Queequeg, twisting his tattooed face into an unearthly expression of disdain. "Ah, him bevy smally fishy. Queequeg no killy smally fishy. Queequeg killy big whale." "Look you," roared the captain, "I'll killy you, you cannibal, if you try any more of your tricks aboard here, so mind your eye." It so happened just then that it was high time for the captain to mind his own eye. The prodigious strain upon the mainsail had parted the weather sheet, and a tremendous boom was now flying from side to side, completely sweeping the entire after part of the deck. The poor fellow whom Queequeg had handled so roughly was swept overboard. All hands were in a panic, and to attempt snatching at the boom to stray it seemed madness. It flew from right to left and back again, almost in one ticking of a watch, and every instant seemed on the point of snapping into splinters. Nothing was done, and nothing seemed capable of being done. Those on deck rushed towards the bows and stood eyeing the boom as if it were the lower jaw of an exasperated whale. In the midst of this consternation, Queequeg dropped deftly to his knees and, crawling under the path of the boom, whipped hold of a rope, secured one end of the bulwarks, and then, flinging the other like a lasso, caught it round the boom as it swept over his head. And at the next jerk the spar was that way trapped, and all was safe. The schooner was run into the wind, and while the hands were clearing away the stern boat, Queequeg, stripped to the waist, darted from the side with a long living arc of a leap. For 3 minutes or more he was seen swimming like a dog, throwing his long arms straight out before him, and by turns revealing his brawny shoulders through the freezing foam. I looked at the grand and glorious fellow, but saw no one to be saved. The greenhorn had gone down. Shooting himself perpendicular from the water, Queequeg now took an instant's glance around him, and seeming to see just how matters were, dived down and disappeared. A few minutes more, and he rose again, one arm still striking out, with the other dragging a lifeless form. The boat soon picked them up. The poor bumpkin was restored. All hands voted Queequeg a noble trump. The captain begged his pardon. From that hour I clove Queequeg like a barnacle, yea, till poor Queequeg took his last long dive. Was there ever such unconsciousness? He did not seem to think that he at all deserved a medal from the humane and magnanimous societies. He only asked for water, fresh water, something to wipe the brine off. That done, he put on dry clothes, lighted his pipe, and leaning against the bulwarks and mildly eyeing those around him, seemed to be saying to himself, "It's mutual joint stock world in all meridians. We cannibals must help these Christians." And thus, ladies and gentlemen, gets us to our stopping point tonight. I hope you've enjoyed the beginning of this reading of Moby Dick. But the book in question is on screen at least. Let us see where we shall go tonight. But I can definitely feel much of the elements that really make this a classic novel already. And plus have some elements that are honestly fairly timeless. After all, you have the starting point of the story focused so heavily upon the immediate presumptions of a person, particularly when they are so very seemingly different. And yet, in the end, it is truly the contents of the character that define someone. From being so ready to avoid Quigweg entirely, to such a deep companionship, truly is important and very classic storytelling. Truly one of the elements that defines some of the greatest works of classic literature. While liking the same connecting trials, of course, it does have many. It does harken well back to many of the bonds of Greek heroes and, of course, Gilgamesh and Enkidu. And while there is much terminology that is so very standardized in its era, the swiftness by which to brand someone even after having camaraderie with them, to still default to using the word savage so frivolously, really is something that defines the era of this in an unfortunate way. But also, I think part of the importance of the connection beyond borders is something that is central to its core driving force of the opening, at least. Its opening chapters definitely are directly or indirectly about the sea, the core of it. And as a result, the way that the sea connects all men, all humankind. The sea defies borders. Connection defies borders. Whether intended as the central message or not, it is definitely a thematic element that is upheld quite well throughout these opening chapters. But that leaves us moving on for the night. I shall send you forward to Roku. Just going to play content warning. Please do give them as much of your affection as you can. We will return on Monday with a little bit of Yuppie Psycho ourselves. But until then, ladies and gentlemen, please do all that you can to enjoy the remainder of your evening. And as always, take care and good night.